In the town of Greer's Crossing, winter clung to the bones of every building like a jealous ghost. The winds came howling down off the mesa and ripped through the abandoned depot, rattling the iron roof until it seemed the whole thing would take flight and vanish into the gray. And yet, even on a night like this, someone waited there. Gideon Holly pulled the collar of his duster higher as he stepped off his tired roan, boots crunching on the frozen mud. The old station house loomed ahead, a crooked silhouette against the snow. No lamp burned inside. He told himself he'd come out of pity, nothing more. But deep down, Gideon knew he was lying to himself. He was tired of ghosts. He should have kept riding. He should have pretended he never saw the letter nailed to the post in town. Widow seeks passage west, reads the rough scrawl. Will marry for safe passage. He'd stood there staring at that piece of paper so long old man Culver called out from his store porch, asking if Gideon had gone soft in the head. Maybe he had. He pushed through the depot's warped door. Inside was all shadows, the air thick with the smell of old coal smoke and mildew. Then he saw her, sitting on a cracked bench, her knees pulled to her chest beneath a thin shawl. Her eyes flickered wide at the sight of him, eyes too sharp to be truly beaten down, though the bruised circles beneath them said she hadn't slept in days. "Ma'am?" Gideon's voice startled him, rough from weeks spent speaking only to his horse. She didn't stand. She just watched him, arms wrapped tight around herself as if she could squeeze out the cold. Her voice was little more than breath. "You're late." He didn't know what he'd expected. Gratitude? A smile? "Not this. Stage never came," Gideon said. "Tracks iced over clear to Silver Creek. You'd have frozen waiting on that bench till spring." Her gaze drifted to the door behind him, as if half expecting to see someone else step through. Someone younger, kinder. She shivered violently, shoulders jerking with the force of it. "Doesn't matter, I'm here." Gideon's fingers twitched. At his sides, he'd buried a wife once. Watched her fade by inches while the land drank up every promise he'd ever made. He'd sworn never again. "Why me?" he asked, voice low. A laugh bubbled up from her, small and bitter. A man asking questions like that must be desperate. He bristled. "You'd rather I was some drunk with a mean streak? Some fool who'd haul you out of here just to have someone to break?" That made her look at him, really look, her eyes the color of pond ice, her cheeks red and raw from the cold. "No," she said finally, "I wouldn't." They stared at each other a long time. Then Gideon shrugged off his duster and draped it over her shoulders. The coat swallowed her whole, hanging nearly to her boots. She didn't thank him, just pulled it tighter. "Name's Gideon Holly," he said. "I got a cabin a day's ride west. Nothing fancy, but it's warm. If we leave now, we can make it by sunup." She didn't move. "Do we have to do it now, the marrying?" He heard the tremor she tried to hide. Not fear of him, but fear of what her life had taught her men could be. He'd seen that flinch in half-broke colts and widows alike. "No," Gideon said. "You'll have a roof and a fire first, a hot meal, and a name that keeps you safe, if that's what you want." She studied him, as if testing the edges of this unexpected kindness. "Anna," she said at last. "Anna Caldwell. I used to be someone's wife." "Used to be," he echoed, and a shard of old sorrow lodged itself under his ribs. "Same." Here, a gust of wind slammed into the depot, rattling the windows so hard she jumped. He reached out his gloved hand, waiting. Slowly, so slowly, Anna slid her frozen fingers into his. Her touch was like ice, but her grip was fierce, as if she feared he'd vanish too, if she let go. Outside, the wind shrieked like something dying. Inside, a widowed cowboy and a freezing bride stepped into the night together, neither sure if they were running toward salvation or just one more mistake to bury in the snow. Gideon helped her onto the roan, then mounted up behind, wrapping his arms around her to steady her against the saddle's sway. She leaned into him without words, her breath a plume of frost in the black air. He felt the tremor in her shoulders but said nothing. The storm would say enough for both of them tonight. As they rode west, the depot shrank behind them, a broken tooth in a land full of ruin. But Gideon didn't look back. He couldn't. The past was a grave he'd dug deep enough already. Hours passed in the saddle, and each mile wore at the walls they'd both built so carefully around their bruised hearts. When she drifted in and out of sleep, Anna's head fell against his chest. Each time, she woke with a start, half apology on her lips, only for him to hush her softly. "You're safe," he'd murmur. "Rest, ain't no one out here but us and the wind." When they reached his cabin, dawn was a pale smear on the horizon. Smoke rose from the chimney. Gideon's ranch hand must have kept the fire banked. He dismounted first, helping Anna down. Like she was made of glass. Inside, the heat hit them both like a blessing. Anna stumbled toward the hearth, shedding his coat to kneel before the flames. She held her hands out, the skin chapped raw but her fingers still trembling. Gideon busied himself boiling coffee, refusing to watch how her shoulders shook with silent sobs she tried to stifle in the crook of her arm. He remembered Sarah, how the sickness took her in the coldest month of the worst winter he'd ever seen. He remembered kneeling just like that, begging the fire to stay lit, as if warmth alone could keep death at bay. He'd failed then. He wouldn't fail now. Anna flinched when he pressed a steaming mug into her palms, but she didn't let go. Their eyes met across the fragile steam rising between them. "You got a place here," Gideon said, "for as long as you want it." A single tear carved a path down her cracked cheek. "And when you change your mind?" He sat beside her, their shoulders brushing, the fire crackling, as if to remind them that warmth was not a thing given lightly in this place. "I buried my last promise out there on the hill," he said. "Ain't making another. I don't intend to keep." Outside, the wind howled. But inside, two people who'd given up on miracles sat side by side, fighting to believe that, maybe, just maybe, some ghosts could be left out in the cold. "Before we jump back in, tell us where you're from. If this story moves you, please subscribe. Tomorrow, I have a special story for you." Anna's breath still misted in the cabin air hours after dawn broke, though the logs Gideon fed the hearth were stacked high enough to chase the chill from the bones. She sat cross-legged on the ragged bearskin rug, Gideon's duster pooled around her shoulders like a shield. Each time she shifted, the coarse fabric brushed her cheek, reminding her she wasn't alone. Not anymore. He worked in silence behind her, boots scuffing across the wide planked floor, the scent of boiling coffee seeping through the crackle of burning wood. She felt his eyes on her every so often, assessing, not prying. Anna hated how easily that could have made her bristle, how so many men before him had mistaken pity for ownership. But Gideon's gaze was different, like he was studying a problem he hadn't decided how to solve yet. Or if it was his to solve at all. He set a steaming mug near her elbow, then eased himself down onto the floor, crossing his long legs like a farm boy at the supper table. He smelled faintly of cold leather and horses, and the edges of his sleeves were still dusted with frost. "Best warm yourself from the inside," he murmured, nodding at the cup. She wrapped her hands around it, wincing at the sting as heat met cracked skin. "I'm trying," she said, her voice as hoarse as a corvid's caw. Then softer, as if the truth needed quiet to survive. "I've been cold a long time." Gideon didn't answer, but the lines around his eyes deepened. He leaned back against the wall, his big shoulders slumping just enough to look tired in the morning light. Tired in that way men got when they'd run out of arguments with themselves. "Folks in town'll be talking by noon," he said finally. "A man leaves alone and comes back with a woman on the saddle? They'll have it half written before I hitch my roan." Anna pulled the duster tighter. "Let them talk." He cracked a ghost of a smile. "Reckon they will. But we ought to make it true, if we mean to make it stick." She didn't ask what he meant. She knew. the same way she knew the taste of her own fear. It rose up, sharp as vinegar, biting the back of her throat. "A piece of paper won't make a mankind," she said. "No," Gideon agreed. He turned his head, looking out the frost-rimmed window to where the pale sun was clawing at the drifts. "But it'll give you my name, and my roof. And folks won't come knocking here with questions about why a woman like you sleepin' in a cabin like mine." Her eyes traced the outline of his jaw, the bristled shadow there. The faint scar running beneath his chin, evidence of some old scrape he'd never mention. He wasn't beautiful, not in the way that turned heads at a dance, but there was something solid in him. A steadiness. Maybe that was worth more. "Why'd you answer the letter?" she asked. He shifted his boots on the bearskin, the leather creaking. "Because you signed it widow, and I know what burying hope feels like. Figured two folks who'd done that once might stand a better chance than most." Anna stared into her coffee, watching the swirl of steam rise and vanish. "You don't know me." Gideon snorted a soft, tired sound that made her chest clench unexpectedly. "Ain't that the point? If I knew you, I'd know your ghosts. Mine are heavy enough." She barked a short laugh, strangled and small. It startled her more than him. When she met his eyes, her mouth trembled around something that almost could have been a smile. "I don't know if I can do this," she said. "You don't have to," Gideon told her. "Not today. But come sundown, the preacher's riding through for a funeral over at Duncan's Ridge. He'll stay the night at the Crossroads house. Most likely. It's the last chance, for the pass closes for good." The clock on the mantel ticked in the silence that followed, each second a tiny hammer chipping at the walls she'd spent years building. "And if I change my mind?" she whispered. "Then I ride you back to that depot come spring," Gideon said. He shrugged. "Or sooner if you ask." The certainty in his voice wrapped around the splintered parts of her. Not a promise to love her, just a promise to be decent. Somehow that meant more. Hours trickled by. Anna dozed by the fire, waking, to find Gideon tossing more logs into the flames, humming under his breath, a low, tuneless thing that carried no weight, but still made the cabin feel less empty. She let herself imagine it then, staying, a warm bed, a roof that didn't leak, a man who didn't raise his hand or his voice. It was too much hope for a woman who'd sworn off hope entirely. When dusk settled over the hills like a bruise, Gideon's ranch hand arrived. A boy of maybe 17 with hay still tangled in his coat, eyes wide when he saw her. "Miss Caldwell," Gideon said, nodding at her. "This here's Finn. Finn. Ann'll be staying on a while." Finn bobbed his head, cheeks flushed. "Pleasure, ma'am." Anna flinched at the word. She'd been a ma'am once when she was young and pretty enough for it to sting like sweetness on the tongue. Now it just tasted like another lie. Gideon clapped Finn's shoulder, guiding him toward the door. "Saddle the roan. And the gray mare for Anna. We'll ride down to Crossroads house, see if the preacher's there." She rose on stiff legs, swaying a little when the warmth of the fire fell away from her skin. Gideon steadied her, hand at the small of her back. He didn't linger. Just enough touch to remind her she wasn't doing this alone. When they stepped out into the dusk, the air bit her cheeks raw. But the sky was clearing, the wind quieting its curses. She let herself imagine that was a sign. The ride to Crossroads house was quiet. The road snaked through stands of bare cottonwoods, the snow unbroken save for the trail. Gideon's roan cut through the drifts. Finn rode ahead, humming some tune half lost on the wind. They dismounted. Under the eaves of the old inn, where lantern lights spilled onto the snow. Inside, the air was thick with pipe smoke and the scent of stew. Faces turned their way as they stepped over the threshold, faces that saw everything. Though no one said much. Mrs. Judkins, the keeper's wife, bustled over, wiping her hands on her apron. "Evening, Mr. Hawley. Come to see the preacher?" Gideon nodded. Anna stood close enough to feel the heat radiating off his coat. She hated that she needed it. Hated more that she wanted it. "He's in the parlor," Mrs. Judkins said, dropping her voice. "Come to bury old man Harlan. Shame, that. He always said he'd die in his field, not in bed." Anna felt Gideon tense beside her. Death made polite folks uncomfortable. But she knew better than most. Death never cared about your plans. They found the preacher by the fire, hat perched on his knee, spectacles perched low on his nose as he thumbed through a battered psalm book. He looked up as they entered, eyes sharp despite his years. "Mr. Halle," he said. "Didn't expect to see you here." "Reckon you didn't," Gideon agreed. He took his hat off, gestured for Anna to sit beside him on the settee. She didn't. She stood. The preacher's gaze flicked to her, and something softened there. Not pity, understanding. Maybe even blessing. "You want it done tonight, I suppose," he said. "If you're willing," Gideon said. Anna felt the eyes on her. The walls pressing in, the past pressing harder. But when Gideon reached for her hand, she didn't flinch. Didn't pull away. Her fingers slipped into his, palm to palm, cold to warm. The preacher opened his psalm book. The words tumbled out like water over stones, ancient and familiar. She heard none of them. She heard the wind, the clock on the mantel, the thunder of her own heart trying to break free from the cage she'd built around it. When it came time to answer, Gideon's voice was steady. "I do." Anna's mouth went dry. The words stuck, lodged like a splinter in her throat. She thought of every bruise, every slammed door, every vow broken before the ink dried. But Gideon's hand was there, solid and warm, his thumb brushing the edge of her palm like a promise. "I do," she said. No applause. No cheers. Just the hush that follows a stone thrown into deep water ripples that might reach farther than either of them could see. When it was done, the preacher snapped his book shut. "God keep you both," he said simply. Then he turned back to the fire as if he'd just witnessed the lighting of a single candle in the endless dark. They stepped out into the cold once more. Snow drifted from the eaves, catching in Anna's hair. She felt Gideon's coat settle over her shoulders again, warm and rough and real. "Ready?" he asked. Anna looked out at the road winding back toward Greer's Crossing, toward a future neither of them could name yet. "Yes," she said, "I think I am." The snow had thickened to a hush by the time Gideon and Anna rode back up the ridge. The steady crunch of hooves through drift and ice was the only sound between them, but silence no longer felt like something to fill. It felt like something they could share. At the cabin, Finn had stoked the fire high and stacked more logs by the hearth. He'd even cleared the stoop, though the wind was already working to undo that bit of kindness. Gideon dismounted first, landing heavy in the snow. Then turned and lifted Anna down as if she weighed nothing at all. Inside, warmth greeted them like a second promise. Anna shivered as she unwrapped her shawl, fingers tracing the iron hook on the door as if testing its reality. She'd been a wife before. She knew the weight of that word, how easily it could become a shackle or a stone around the throat. But tonight it settled on her shoulders like the coat Gideon draped across them. Warm, heavy enough to feel real, but not crushing. "Hungry?" Gideon asked. He tugged off his gloves and laid them on the hearthstone to dry. Anna nodded, though the truth was her stomach was a knot of nerves, each loop cinched tight with old memories she'd rather leave buried under the snow. He busied himself in the kitchen corner, pulling down beans and salt pork, setting the pot to boil while she watched from the rocking chair near the fire. She studied his hands' broad palms, square fingers scarred by ranch work and storms. They moved with quiet certainty, as if every small motion was an act of care he'd never learned how to speak aloud. "I can help," she said after a while. Her voice barely rose above the crackle of the logs. Gideon glanced over his shoulder, an eyebrow lifted like a question. "Didn't bring you here to work, Anna. Didn't come here to be useless either." His mouth twitched something. That wasn't quite a smile, but felt like one anyway. He set a battered knife on the cutting board and stepped aside. "Be my guest." She joined him at the table, fingers clumsy on the cold blade at first. But soon the rhythm of slicing onions and dicing salt pork steadied her heartbeat. It was a small thing, but it tethered her to the moment, kept her from drifting back to a cold depot bench or the rutted road behind her. When they sat down to eat, the wind rattled the shutters like an old warning, but the stew was hot, and the bread was soft enough to tear without a knife. They ate in companionable quiet. No forced talk. No expectation that they fill the emptiness with words, just to prove they weren't afraid of it. "Finn'll stay out at the bunkhouse tonight," Gideon said after a while, voice low. "You'll have the bed. I'll take the rocker by the fire." Anna's spoon paused mid-her. "I won't chase you from your own bed." He shrugged. "Don't mind. Never slept well in it alone anyhow. Rocker's just as good." His calm declaration made something loosen in her chest. He asked nothing she wasn't ready to give. He didn't push, didn't pretend the paper in. The preacher's book changed the past or what would grow in the shadow of it. They cleared the dishes together. When the last tin cup was wiped and stacked, Anna stood by the hearth, twisting the end of her braid. Gideon pulled a folded blanket from a chest and laid it across the rocker, testing its cushion with one broad hand. "Don't have to worry none," he said. "Door stays open if you want it." She let out a slow breath. "Thank you." And she meant it. Not for the bed, not for the fire or the roof or the coffee he'd kept topping up in her mug. For the quiet space he left around her grief. For the way he held her gaze without asking for anything she wasn't ready to give. Upstairs, the small bedroom smelled faintly of cedar shavings. The quilt was patched but clean. The sheets crisp from months hung in the dry cold. Anna sat on the edge of the mattress, boots still on, staring at the cracked plaster wall. She half expected to feel the ache of old bruises, the clench in her belly that came with a creaking door. But there was no tread of heavy boots, no slurred threat through whiskey breath. Just the murmur of Gideon's voice drifting up from below. Talking low to Finn as they checked the latch on the back shed, she unlaced her boots, slid them off with a soft thump. The mattress dipped as she lay back, one hand pressed flat to the quilt as if to anchor herself. Her eyes drifted shut. For the first time in too many winters, sleep took her before fear could crawl up her throat. Downstairs, Gideon sat in the rocker, one booted foot hooked under the runner, pushing it back and forth across the hearthstone. Finn was rolled up tight, in a horse blanket near the dying coals, snoring soft as a pup. Gideon's eyes kept straying to the narrow stairs. He told himself he was watching for trouble, that he was too old and too weary for the kinds of thoughts that got a man killed when they roamed in the dark. But the truth was, he'd forgotten how it felt to listen for another person's breath in the quiet house, to feel the weight of someone else's presence, settle the ghosts that rattled around in the bones of these walls. He thought of Sarah, how she used to hum while she washed dishes, how she'd stand barefoot on the porch, squinting at the sky as if she could read the weather in the shape of the clouds. He thought of the last promise he'd made her, that he'd stay kind, that he'd keep his word, that he wouldn't let the land break him the way it broke so many men out here, far from any mercy but what they could make for themselves. His eyes drifted shut. The rocker creaked in time with his heartbeat, carrying him through the hours until the first pale light of dawn slipped through the frost-laced window panes. Anna woke with the sun in her eyes. It took her a moment to remember where she was. The warmth of the quilt, the faint scent of wood smoke that clung to her hair. Her heartbeat settled when she heard Gideon's low voice downstairs, Finn's laughter, bubbling up like spring water. She dressed quickly, pulling on her boots, braiding her hair back with numb fingers. When she descended the stairs, Gideon was leaning over the stove, showing Finn how to set the coals just right to catch the new kindling. He looked up when she entered, that quiet, assessing gaze steady on her face. "Coffee's on," he said. Anna nodded, settling into the same rocking chair he'd slept in. Finn bobbed his head at her, cheeks flushed with the glow of a boy who'd found himself useful for once. "Storm will clear by afternoon," Gideon said. "I'll ride to town. Lay in more supplies if you've a mind to make this place a touch more comfortable." Anna stared at her hands folded in her lap. She could taste the choice in the air like snowmelt and ash. She could let him go alone, stay hidden up here, and be the ghost she'd been for so long. Or she could step back into a world that might never let her forget who she'd been, but might teach her to live again anyway. "Take me with you," she said. Her voice barely cracked. Gideon's brow lifted, just a fraction, but he only nodded. "Reckon you'll want to pick your own blankets and tea then." Finn whooped, clapping his mitts together. "And I'll mind the horses, see they don't slip on the ice." Gideon mussed the boy's hair, a rare flash of warmth in the stern line of his mouth. Anna felt it down to the tips of her fingers. How kindness could slip into a man's bones without ever asking permission. They rode out before noon, the pass still heavy with drifts, but the sky clearing overhead in bands of sharp blue. Anna tucked her gloved hands into the folds of Gideon's duster, her chin nearly brushing his shoulder as they moved down the trail. Each hoofbeat was a small defiance of the life she'd left behind. Each breath of that sharp air was a reminder. That hope was something you could carry with you. Like a flame cupped in cold hands, they reached Greer's Crossing by mid-afternoon. Folks watched from porch stoops, eyes flicking from Gideon to the woman riding pillion behind him. She felt their questions like brambles at her ankles, but Gideon's back was broad and steady in front of her, blocking the worst of the wind and the worst of the stairs. Inside the mercantile, warmth and the scent of spice welcomed them. Anna drifted the narrow aisles in silence, fingers brushing bolts of fabric, jars of preserves, neat rows of dry goods she'd once taken for granted. Gideon trailed behind, offering no opinion, just his presence solid and certain at the counter. Old man Culver leaned in, squinting at the ring on Anna's hand, then at the set of her shoulders. "Thought you'd be back on the trail by now, Halle," Culver said. "Didn't figure you for the marrying kind again." Gideon didn't flinch. "Didn't figure I was either," he said. He turned to Anna, his eyes holding hers for a beat longer than Culver could bear. "Some things you don't figure on. They find you anyway." Anna looked down at the coil of thread in her palm, the color a soft green she hadn't worn since she was a girl. She set it on the counter. "I'd like 5 yards of this," she said. Her voice didn't tremble. Culver grunted, wrapping the bolt, and when he passed the parcel across, his hand was gentle, almost shy. Outside, the wind had picked up again, chasing them down the street to where the horses waited. Gideon helped her into the saddle, the warmth of his hands lingering on her waist. "Still good?" he asked. Anna looked back toward the mercantile, the open road, the whole of the ridge behind them wrapped in white impossibility. For the first time the cold didn't bite so deep. "Yes," she said, her breath curling in the air like smoke. "Still good." They rode home through the lengthening dusk, 2 figures against the snow, each carrying the weight of old scars and the fragile promise of what could grow in the thaw. The snow gave way to a raw thaw that week, a half-hearted promise of spring that left the road to Greer's Crossing a churn of mud and ice. Anna spent the days bent over the battered table by the hearth, needle in hand, stitching green thread through old calico. It felt foolish, maybe sewing new curtains when a roof leaked or boards creaked loose underfoot, but every neat stitch whispered a reminder. This place was hers to tend now. Gideon moved around her like a patient shadow. Some mornings, he rose before dawn to mend the fence line or check the feed. When he returned, boots heavy with thawed clay, he'd stamp them on the stoop so she wouldn't fret over muddy prints on the rug she'd scrubbed clean just yesterday. Once she caught him lingering in the doorway, watching her draw thread through fabric with a softness on his face that made her throat tight. "Need a hand?" he'd asked, voice low. She shook her head. You'd bleed out inside an hour trying to stitch a straight line. His rough chuckle warmed her in ways she didn't let herself dwell on too long. On the fourth night, Finn banged open the door just after dusk, cheeks pink with cold and eyes wide. "Those folks coming up the trail," he panted. "2 riders. Didn't look like they meant good." Gideon's mouth went flat. He pushed past the boy, standing in the open doorway, shoulders squared to the dusk. Anna felt her pulse thrum in her neck. She rose from her chair, wiping her palms on her apron, trying to keep her voice steady. "You expecting anyone?" Gideon didn't turn. "Not in years." They came into the yard just as the stars flickered awake 2 shapes on horseback, trailing plumes of steam from their mounts. Men wrapped in dusters slick with melting snow, hats tugged low, eyes hidden in the shadows. When they swung down, Anna saw the holstered pistols first. The way they rested their hands on them, like casual threats. "Evenin', Holly," one called, voice a cracked drawl. "Heard tell you took in a stray." Gideon didn't answer, didn't move. Anna felt the weight of the space between them, how it crackled like a storm held in check. The taller of the 2 stepped closer, boots crunching in the thaw. He smelled of cheap whiskey and stale tobacco. He peered past Gideon, gaze snagging on Anna where she stood in the lamplight. A grin spread slow over broken teeth. "Well now, ain't she something? Word in town said you brought her back on. The saddle like some prize. Ain't that right?" Gideon's voice, when it came, was quiet as snow falling on dead leaves. "You got business, say it. Otherwise you can turn your horses back the way they came." The second man laughed a sharp bark that made Finn flinch behind the doorframe. "Aw, come on, Gideon. We just come to congratulate the happy couple. Maybe toast your good fortune." Anna forced her feet to stay planted, forced her hands to unclench. She'd spent too many years making herself small, so men like these would look past her. Tonight she felt every inch of the bruise she'd once been, and every stitch she'd put into mending it. "You've said your piece," Gideon said. He shifted, the way a mountain might shift before a rock slide. "Now you can leave." The taller one snorted, spit steaming in the mud. "Or what? You think a name's enough to keep a woman like that safe out here? We remember what you were, Holly. We remember you used to settle scores with your fists and your gun, not some scrap of paper from a preacher." Silence fell so heavy, Anna thought she'd choke on it. Then Gideon stepped forward. Just 1 step, but the man's grin faltered. "Last I recall," Gideon said, each word measured, "you and your kin ran from my fence line with your tails tucked when you tried taking cattle that weren't yours." The man bristled, reaching for his belt. Anna saw Gideon's shoulders tense, then she moved. She didn't plan it. She only knew the next breath might taste like blood if she didn't. She stepped onto the porch, the warped plank groaning under her boots. The cold slammed into her, but she kept her chin up. "You done staring?" she asked. Her voice scraped out raw, but it held. "Or you think you can talk a woman back into the snow because you've got nothing better to brag about?" The man's mouth twitched, surprise flickering into something darker. "Watch your tongue, missy." Gideon's hand shot up, palm open. "She's under my roof, my name. That means you watch your tongue." They glared at each other, 3 figures framed in the cabin's lamplight while the night closed in. Finn stood frozen just inside, eyes round as coins. "Next time you feel neighborly," Gideon said, voice like a blade dulled on old bone, "send a card. Don't bring guns to my door." The men muttered curses, spit frozen words onto the ground, then mounted up. Hooves squelched in the half-thawed mud as they turned back down the trail, their silhouettes swallowed by the pines. Anna let out a breath that stung her chest. She didn't realize Gideon was staring until he spoke. "You didn't have to do that, I know," she said. Her hands trembled, so she shoved them into her pockets. "But I did." Inside, Finn slunk to the bunkhouse without a word, eyes wide. The door thudded shut behind him, leaving Gideon and Anna in the hush of the Hearths glow. The cabin felt too small and too big all at once. He reached out, brushing a bit of wind-tangled hair from her cheek. His thumb lingered just below her jaw. You're brave when you shouldn't have to be. She met his eyes, the storm in her chest still finding its calm. So are you. He almost smiled. Almost. Get some rest. Tomorrow I'll check the fence line again. Those men won't stay away long if they think there's something here worth taking. Anna wanted to say they'd find nothing worth stealing here but each other. But the words were too big for her tongue. Instead, she laid her hand on his chest for the briefest second, feeling the steady thrum of his heart beneath wool and flannel. Upstairs, the small bedroom waited with its mended quilt and the faint scent of cedar. She lay down without undressing, boots dangling from her feet, listening for the squeak of Gideon's rocker below. When it came, slow and measured, she let her eyelids drift shut. She dreamed that night, not of the men who came with guns and barbed words, but of herself, standing taller on the porch, her voice clear enough to chase ghosts back into the dark dot at dawn. She woke to Finn's voice outside the window. Gideon was barking orders to him: stack the feed, mind the gate, no more half-latched. Doors for the wind to slam. Anna washed her face at the basin, watching her reflection ripple in the water like a stranger she might finally learn to love. She found Gideon at the fence line an hour later, sleeves rolled to his elbows, hammer, tapping iron nails into warped wood. He looked up when he heard her boots crunch the frost. Could have stayed inside, he said. She shrugged. Could have. Anna lifted a coil of wire, unspooling it between gloved palms. Gideon watched her loop it tight, nodding once in that quiet way he had when words were wasted. They worked until the sun burned the last frost off the posts. When they finally stood back, sweat prickling under collars, the fence held firm. Gideon leaned on the top rail, his gaze sweeping the ridgeline where the trees gathered like old men hunched against the wind. They'll come back, he said. Anna looked at him, the hammer still warm in her hand. Then we'll be ready. Gideon's eyes flicked to her surprise, then something softer. We? She swallowed, felt the words settle on her tongue like an ember in the cold. We. Back at the cabin, Finn had coaxed the stove to life and set a pot of beans on to bubble. He grinned when they stepped inside, cheeks smudged with ash. Smells good, Gideon said, clapping the boy's shoulder. Might make a ranch hand of you yet. Finn puffed up, glancing at Anna for approval. She just smiled and knelt to stoke the fire higher. When the sun dipped behind the ridge, Anna stood at the window, needle in hand, stitching the last hem into her new curtains. Through the glass she could see the fence line, the distant woods, the long trail down the ridge where trouble sometimes rode in with the wind. She knew it would come again. The cold, the fear, the hungry eyes that wanted to strip her name from her bones. But she also knew she wouldn't face it alone. In the flicker of lamplight, Gideon watched her work, hands resting on his belt buckle, eyes soft with something. That might be hope. Or something older, deeper, a vow stitched together, one slow loop at a time. Tomorrow she'd hang the curtains. Tomorrow the thaw would creep further down the ridge. Tomorrow she'd stand on that porch again, unafraid. To be seen. Tonight they were warm. Tonight they were here. And that was enough. Morning came soft and gray, the kind that made the whole ridge seem wrapped in lamb's wool. The world was damp and quiet, the only sound the drip of thawed snow from the eaves. Anna stood on the stoop, hands wrapped tight around a chipped mug, watching the curtain she'd sewn sway gentle in the window. It looked like something small and defiant, proof that a place could be made warm by the work of careful hands. Gideon's voice drifted from the yard. He was speaking to Finn in that low, steady way he used with skittish horses. She listened to the shape of it more than the words, a man trying to teach without breaking something delicate. Finn's laughter answered him, light and raw like a creek just thawed. Anna closed her eyes and let that sound settle inside her. She'd known laughter that left bruises, jokes that turned mean when the bottle ran dry. This was different. This was the kind of sound that reminded you not every kindness had a price hidden behind it. She stepped off the stoop, boots sinking into the soft churn of mud and old snow. Finn spotted her first, giving a whoop that sent a flock of crows flapping. From the cottonwoods, "Mornin', Miss Anna," he called. "Mornin' yourself," she said, smiling despite the chill. She looked at Gideon, his sleeves already rolled, hat pushed back on his brow, eyes crinkled at the corners. He hadn't shaved yet. She found she didn't mind. "Fence still holding?" she asked. "For now," Gideon said. He hooked his hammer through his belt. "Tracks out by the east line. Could be deer. Could be someone else." Anna's mouth went dry. She glanced at Finn, who was busy kicking at a frozen rut in the mud, humming under his breath. Gideon saw the flicker in her eyes and touched her arm light, but enough. "They won't catch us off guard," he said. "Not this time." They worked until midday, checking rails and tightening wire, the thaw turning the earth to muck that sucked at their boots. Anna didn't ask to help. She just found a length of wire, took the hammer when he handed it to her. Her hands were raw and pink by the time they finished, but she didn't hide them. She'd spent too long hiding bruises. These were marks she'd earned. When they returned to the cabin, Finn was already inside, coaxing a pot of beans and smoked pork belly into something that smelled like home. He set 3 chipped bowls on the table and practically danced from foot to foot when they came through the door. "I salted it good," he said proudly. "Won't taste like creek water this time." Anna ruffled his hair as she passed, settling into her chair with a grunt. Gideon sat across from her, arms folded, eyes warm as the fire. Finn prattled on about how he'd mend the barn roof come spring, how the pass would open again, how maybe they could keep a few chickens if the foxes didn't get clever. Anna let the words wash over her like a lullaby. She caught Gideon watching her now and again, that same patient question in his eyes. "Are you here? Are you staying?" After the meal, she cleared the bowls while Gideon stacked the woodbox high. The day slid soft into dusk, shadows stretching like fingers along the cabin floor. Anna knelt by the hearth, brushing ash from the old stone. Her skirts dusted gray. "You don't have to do that," Gideon said behind her. She felt him before. She heard him like a warm shape in a room that had known too much cold. "It needs doing," she said. "I don't mind." He crouched beside her, knees creaking like old floorboards. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then his hand closed over hers, gently prying the soot-black brush from her fingers. "Anna," just her name, no command. Number. Question. Just her name said like it meant something. She looked at him, really looked. The lines bracketing his mouth. The fine grit of sawdust caught in his hair. She thought of the night on the depot bench, how cold she'd been, how certain no warmth could reach her again. She thought of how she'd woken that first morning under his roof, a woman who might belong somewhere again, if she could stand it. "I don't know how to be your wife," she said. The words spilled out before she could stop them. "I only know how to survive a man's house, not how to make it into something better." His thumb brushed a smudge of ash from her cheek. "Don't reckon there's a rule book for it. I only know how to be here when you need me, and gone when you don't." A sound caught in her throat. Not a sob, something smaller. Something like the first breath drawn in a new place. He tipped his forehead to hers, the warmth of him sinking through her skin like sun on frost. "You're here now. That's enough for me." She wanted to say more. Wanted to tell him she still dreamed of boot heels on stairs, of doorframes split by angry fists, of promises broken and buried under the snow. But his hand on hers said she didn't have to speak it yet. Maybe not ever. Finn's snore rose from the pallet by the stove, a childish hiccup of sound that broke the hush like a bird's warble at dawn. Gideon chuckled, low and rough. "I'll take first watch tonight," he said. "Just in case those boys come sniffing around again." Anna touched his sleeve. fingers tracing the worn seam near his elbow. "Wake me if you need a second pair of eyes." He lifted her hand to his lips, kissed her knuckles, a simple gesture that burned hotter than the fire. Then he rose, shrugging. Into his coat, shotgun balanced easy in one hand. Hours later, Anna lay beneath the patched quilt, eyes fixed on the ceiling beams above. Every creak, every gust of wind rattling the shutters was a memory she had to breathe through. But each time her mind slid toward the edge, she felt the faint thud of Gideon's boots on the porch, the click of his lighter as he checked the shadows. He was there, not as a warden, not as a master, but as a sentinel between her and the old darkness. She must have drifted sometime before dawn. When she woke, the cabin was cold, but the hearth glowed with embers. Gideon's hat rested on the peg. By the door, his boots beside it, muddy but lined up neat. Like a promise he'd come back inside, she found him just before sunrise, perched on the porch rail with the shotgun across his knees, eyes rimmed red with fatigue. He didn't startle when she stepped out, didn't turn to look at her right. "Away, trail's quiet," he said, voice raspy. "If they meant trouble, they're thinking twice now." Anna drew her shawl tighter, toes curling in the frost that bit through her socks. "You shouldn't sit out here alone all night." His mouth quirked, a half-smile that never reached his eyes. "I ain't alone." She settled beside him, hip brushing his. They sat in silence, the sun lifting over the pines, gold spilling down the ridge like a benediction. Gideon's hand found hers, calloused fingers wrapping around her raw ones. "We'll fix the barn next," he said after a while. "Roof's half-rotted. You'll catch your death trying to milk any hope from it as it is." She snorted, leaning her head against his shoulder. "Never thought I'd care about a barn roof again." His thumb traced circles on her knuckles. "A roof's just a promise," he murmured. "You keep it patched, it keeps you dry. Same as folks, I reckon." Anna's breath caught. The world smelled of wet pine and thawed earth, the promise of green shoots beneath the old snow. For the first time, she let herself believe that maybe some promises didn't rot out from under you when you needed them most. Below, Finn's laughter echoed as he dashed from the bunkhouse to scatter feed for the chickens they hadn't bought yet. Anna closed her eyes, letting the warmth of the sun creep through the thin shawl at her shoulders. A year ago she'd have laughed at herself for wanting such simple things, a roof that held, a man who stayed, a boy's laughter cracking the hush of dawn. But here, on this porch rail with the sun climbing and Gideon's hand wrapped around, hers like a vow spoken without words, she let herself want it all. She let herself stay. The thaw crept slow but certain down the ridge, pulling green shoots from the mud like secrets coaxed from a quiet mouth. By the second week of March, the trail out front ran soft and rutted. The fence line held its shape under the last crusts of ice, and Anna found herself waking each dawn with the strange ache of wanting tomorrow to come faster. Gideon had taken to walking the line at dawn, boots sinking into the slush, shotgun resting easy in the crook of his elbow. He never said if he saw tracks or signs of men. He only came back in with mud on his cuffs and a soft scrape of stubble on his jaw when he kissed her cheek in greeting. Each morning he did it, and each morning she found herself leaning just a little closer. Inside, the cabin felt different, like the walls themselves remembered warmth. Anna spent her mornings by the hearth, scraping away soot and scrubbing the stone until her knuckles ached, as if she could scour the old ghosts from the corners. At midday, she took to the garden patch behind the barn. The soil turned up clumpy and stubborn, but she worked it with a borrowed hoe from old Culver's place, arms burning under layers of worn flannel. By dusk, her back would ache enough that Gideon would cluck his tongue, ease her down into the rocker by the fire, and place his big hand at the base of her spine like a balm. She didn't tell him how much she needed that touch. He didn't ask. They both pretended it was nothing more than kindness. Maybe it was. Finn had started to whistle while he worked. He whistled while he brushed down the roan, while he mended the hinge on the bunkhouse door, while he hauled buckets of cold water up from the creek. When Anna teased him about it, he turned red as an apple. "Just feels good, miss," he said, ducking his head. "Feels good having folks to work for that don't." Anna laid her hand on his shoulder. She didn't make him finish the sentence. Some truths spoke themselves without a tongue. One morning, a week into the thaw, Gideon came in from the fence line with a line drawn deep between his brows. He dropped his hat on the peg and looked at her where she stood by the stove, the kettle hissing a thin song. "Riders again," he said. "Tracks near the old creek bed. Fresh." Anna's gut clenched, but her hands didn't shake as she sat. The kettle aside, "Same as before?" he nodded. "Could be they're just passing through. Could be they're waiting for a chance." Anna watched him unwrap the scarf from his neck, the lines of worry carved deeper at the edges of his mouth. She stepped close, thumb brushing away a fleck of mud on his collar. "We'll be ready," she said. He caught her wrist before she could pull away, held it there a moment longer than the moment needed. There was something in his eyes she couldn't read, not yet, not quite. But she felt it settle in her chest like a coal that hadn't gone out. No matter how long the wind had tried to snuff it, they spent the day stacking wood, hauling water, checking the latch on the cellar door twice. Over. Finn made a show of oiling the old rifle that had hung untouched over the hearth since before Anna ever stepped foot in that cabin. His fingers were clumsy, but Gideon watched him without laughing, only stepping in when the boy nearly dropped. The cloth dot by sundown, the shadows crawled long across the yard. Gideon sat on the porch rail, eyes fixed on the trail winding down through the cottonwoods. Anna brought him coffee, her own cup warm between her palms as she perched on the steps. Below, "What happens if they come again?" she asked. Gideon's jaw flexed. "Depends on what they come for." "And if they come for me?" His gaze snapped down to hers, sharp as the crack of splitting wood. "Then they'll find out what it means to knock on this door looking for something they got no right to." She didn't flinch from that promise. She let it wrap around her like the old quilt on their bed upstairs patchwork, frayed at the edges but warm all the same. She woke to the echo of boots on the stoop. Her breath stuck sharp in her throat until Gideon's voice drifted through the dark. "Just me," he murmured. He crossed the room in 3 strides, dropped onto the edge of the bed, cold air swirling around him. Winds picked up. Thought. "I heard something by the shed." Anna shifted beneath the covers, her fingers reaching without thinking to the back of his hand. It was rough, cold, but alive, real. Was it them? Probably a branch come loose, nothing more. But his eyes told her he'd stand guard till dawn, if that's what it took to keep her safe. She didn't ask him to stay. She didn't have to. He set the shotgun by the door and settled on the floor beside the bed, back against the wall, boots crossed at the ankles. She lay there listening to his breathing until her eyelids slipped shut. The quiet rumble of his presence a lullaby sweeter than any lie she'd ever told herself about being alone. When dawn cracked the frost, Gideon was gone from the floor. She found him at the fence again, boots planted in the slush, scanning the ridge. She joined him with 2 mugs of coffee. The steam curled between them as she handed one over. "See anything?" she asked. He shook his head. "Nothing yet." They stood there until Finn came stumbling from the bunkhouse, hair stuck up like straw, rubbing sleep from his eyes. "Mornin'," he mumbled. "Mornin'," Anna echoed. And the world, for a heartbeat, felt whole. That afternoon, word came up from town that the preacher's wife had taken sick. Gideon saddled the roan to ride down with bread and a parcel of coffee. He looked back at Anna 3 times before he crossed the yard, each glance a question he didn't know how to ask. "I'll mind things here," she called, chin up, feet planted firm on the stoop. "Go on." Finn fetched the rifle down for her before the roan was out of sight. He laid it across her arms like a farmer showing off his prize hen. "You know how to use it?" he asked. Anna set the butt on the stoop, tested the weight. Once, she said, long time ago. Finn didn't press. He only nodded, cheeks hollow with the worry a boy his age shouldn't have to carry. She ruffled his hair before she turned back to the house. Inside, the hearth crackled, the kettle hissed. The world held its shape for one more dusk. Hours crawled. The wind clawed at the shutters, rattling them like bones in an old grave. Anna perched by the window, the rifle across her knees, eyes tracing every shadow in the yard. Finn sat cross-legged by the hearth, carving nonsense shapes into a scrap of wood. When hooves crunched the road after dark, her heart slammed up against her ribs. She stood so fast the rifle nearly clattered to the floor. Finn rose too, mouth a thin line, carving knife forgotten at his feet. The knot that came next wasn't rough, it was gentle. 2 taps, then silence. She edged to the door, cheek near. Asim, voice steady as she could make it. Who's there? Gideon's answer was soft but clear. It's me. She fumbled the latch, nearly dragged him inside by his coat. Snow spangled his hair, his shoulders dusted white. He closed the door behind him with a click, eyes flicking to the rifle in her grip. One corner of his mouth twitched. Didn't think I'd find you ready to run me off, he said. She let the rifle sag, arms trembling now that the fear had somewhere to go. Don't be funny. He brushed the snow from his hat, set it on the peg, and pulled her into him, chin tucked into her hair. She let herself be gathered, just for a moment, just until her heart remembered how to beat without stumbling. They still out there? She asked into his chest. Didn't see ya. Soul on the ridge, but they'll try again. I know it. Anna pulled back, eyes sharp in the lamplight. Then let him come. His brow arched, surprise flickering before it softened into something like pride. Then let him come, he echoed. He stepped past her, set his shotgun by the door, then took the rifle from her arms like it was the most ordinary thing in the world. Finn had already settled back by the hearth, carving away as if no ghosts waited beyond the cottonwoods. Anna moved to the window, palm flat against the cool glass. The yard beyond was dark, but the cabin pulsed with light hearth glow, lamp glow. The soft fire of a family building itself from the scraps of what had come before. She watched Gideon cross to the table, his back broad, shoulders steady. She watched him glance her way, eyes catching hers, as if to remind her that even if trouble came on the next dawn, they'd meet it together. She let her palm drop from the glass, turned back to the warmth inside, and breathed. The next morning dawned brittle and white, a thin rime of frost painting the windows despite the creeping promise of spring. Anna rose before Gideon did rare, these days, and let her bare feet find the cold boards as she padded to the window. She pressed her palm to the glass and watched the ridge breathe out mist where the snow melted from the trees. It looked harmless, that slow thaw. A trick of the land to make you believe it would never turn on you again. Downstairs Finn was already rattling around by the hearth, humming tunelessly while he stacked kindling. She found him cross-legged by the stove door, poking at coals with the careful focus of a boy trying not to break the only thing that kept the dark from swallowing them all. Don't poke too hard, Anna said softly. You'll kill the flame. Finn grinned up at her, soot smudged across his cheek. Ain't killed it yet, miss. She ruffled his hair as she passed, a gesture that felt more hers each time she did it. There'd been a boy once her sister's, not hers, back east with the same shock of stubborn hair. She'd kept that memory folded up tight all these years, like a letter she couldn't bear to read. Now it opened on its own, when she least expected, and it didn't sting the way it used to. She laid out the bread she'd baked yesterday, dense, rough-hewn loaves that cracked like stone, but tasted sweet when you tore them open. She'd never been good at baking. Her first husband used to laugh about it, mean and low. Gideon only teased once, then kissed the flour from her forehead. She turned at the sound of boots on the stairs. Gideon appeared, hair damp from the pump-out back collar. Still loose. He looked at her like he always did in the morning, like he wasn't sure he deserved the sight of her standing there, sleeves rolled, bread in hand, alive and unafraid. "Mornin'," he said, voice rough. "Morning," she echoed, handing him a tin cup. "Coffee's strong. Sorry." He took it without blinking. Better than weak. He sipped and made a show of grimacing. Finn snorted into his sleeves. They ate at the table together, quiet but not strained. The silence was the kind that settled around people who trusted each other to keep the edges soft. Gideon thumbed through an old ledger between bites, mumbling about feed costs and fence repairs. Anna let her mind drift to the yard, how the coop would stand come spring, the seeds she'd bury in the stubborn dirt behind the barn, the old patch of earth that would bloom if she just kept her hands in it long enough. When the meal was done, Finn disappeared to the bunkhouse to oil the tack Gideon had left out to dry. Anna scrubbed the plates, listening to the scrub of Gideon's boots on the porch as he went out to check the trail again. She waited until the latch clicked behind him, then let her shoulders drop. The quiet that filled the cabin in his absence was the old kind, the hollow hush she'd carried with her all those years on the road, from one cold station to the next. But it didn't settle like it used to. It didn't wrap its fingers around her throat and squeeze dot. She stood there for a moment, water dripping from her wrists, watching the steam rise from the kettle. Then she dried her hands, wrapped a shawl around her shoulders, and stepped out into the brittle morning. Gideon stood at the fence line, boots sunk to the ankles in thawed mud, shotgun balanced easy across one shoulder. He looked like he'd been carved into the landscape long before the frost ever found it. She stepped to his side, her boots slipping a little in the churned earth. "Any tracks?" she asked. "Some," he said. He jerked his chin toward the tree line. "Could be a coyote, could be worse." She felt the question bloom in her chest. What happens if they come back? But it was an old question, and they both knew the answer. They'd face it together, or they'd break together. Either way, the fear wouldn't have her alone anymore. Gideon turned to look at her, eyes squinting into the rising sun. "You don't have to stand out here, you know. Finn could use a hand in the barn. Warm in there." She hooked her fingers into the fence rail. "Not leaving you alone with ghosts that think they can still knock on our door." A ghost of a smile tugged at his mouth. He reached out, brushed a stray lock of hair from her cheek. "All right then." They stood there until the sun climbed high enough to melt the frost from the fence posts. Anna watched the drip of it, how the ice let go when the sun touched it. Just right. She wondered if she looked that way to Gideon, something thawing, something giving way to warmth one drop at a time. When the wind picked up, they moved to the barn. Finn was perched on an overturned crate, legs swinging while he worked the oil into the old leather. He looked up bright-eyed when they came in. "Got the saddle near good as new," he said. "Won't squeak none now." Gideon ruffled the boy's hair, something he'd never done before Anna came to stay. "Good man." They spent the morning mending what they could, a latch here, a loose board there. Anna swept out the old straw, nose full of the sweet smell of hay and old horses. When she turned, she caught Gideon watching her again. Not possessive, just seeing her, seeing the place they were making out of what used to be ruined. At noon, they sat in the hayloft, legs dangling over the edge, sharing the last of the bread. Finn dozed curled up in a pile of burlap sacks, his mouth half open like a pup's. Gideon nudged Anna's knee with his own. "You're restless," he said. It wasn't a question. She let out a breath, tasting the words before she spoke them. "I keep waiting to feel like I belong. Like I'm not just a guest who'll be sent packing when the thaw is through." He didn't answer right away. He just reached into his coat pocket and pulled out something small. A scrap of paper, edges soft with age. He laid it flat across his palm. "Your letter," he said. "The one you posted at the station." She stared at it, her own cramped handwriting, blurred by rain or tears or both. Widow seeks passage west. Will marry for safe passage. I was going to burn it, he said. Figured maybe it was time. But I kept it, don't know why. Maybe to remind myself what brought you here. Anna reached out, her finger tracing the softened edge. Do you want to keep being reminded? His eyes met hers, pale and clear as the sky above the barn rafters. No, I want to know what comes next. She took the paper, folded it slow, and tucked it deep in her pocket. She could feel it there, proof of where she'd been, but not the whole of what she was now. What comes next, then? She asked, Gideon's. Hand found hers on the rough boards, thumb brushing her knuckles. Whatever you want it to be. A gust of wind rattled the barn roof, but inside it was warm hay sweet, sun-dappled. Finn snored on, blissfully unaware. Anna closed her eyes, letting the moment settle into her bones. She thought of the seeds she'd plant when the ground softened, the curtains she'd mend when the wind tore through them again, the coffee she'd brew too strong just to watch Gideon drink it with that patient grimace. She thought of the shadows that still waited at the edge of the tree line, the men who'd ride up again. Certain a woman like her could be dragged back to what she'd run from. She opened her eyes and looked at Gideon, at the calluses on his hands, the scar under his chin, the steady way he met her gaze without flinching. Then, we stay ready, she said. We build this, slow, careful, and when the snow comes back, it'll find us still standing. His grin was small but real. He squeezed her hand once, firm enough to promise he'd never let go first. They sat like that until Finn stirred, blinking up at them through a mess of straw hair. He grinned, all teeth and dirt. What did I miss? He mumbled. Anna laughed, a sound that startled her with its warmth. She reached out, brushed the boy's cheek, and said the thing she hadn't let herself believe she could say yet. Nothing, Finn. You didn't miss a thing. Outside, the ridge-weighted wind stirring the branches, old ghosts pacing just beyond the fence. But inside, in the hayloft of a half-rotted barn patched together by 3 tired hands, something stronger than winter was putting down roots. And for now, that was enough. The thaw held its grip on the ridge longer than any of them expected. By the middle of April, the creek behind the barn was running fat with meltwater, and the mud out front swallowed a man's boots up to the ankles. Anna stood in the doorway. Most mornings, coffee in hand, and watched the water run where the frozen ground once cracked and split. It was a reminder. Even what was hardest and coldest could soften given enough time. The day started like any other. Finn tripped out to the yard, boots too big and hat too loose, whistling a tune he'd picked up from one of Gideon's old records. Gideon himself leaned against the porch post, eyes fixed on the trail where ruts told stories of wagons and riders from weeks before. Think they'll come back? Finn asked. He was getting bolder with his questions now, like the weight in his shoulders had eased just a hair. Gideon flicked ash from his cigarette, squinting at the tree line. Men like that don't stay gone for good. They see something they want. They circle it until they figure the cost. Anna heard it from the kitchen. She didn't flinch. She rinsed her hands in the basin, wiped them on her apron, and stepped out onto the stoop. If they come back, she said, voice calm as the thawing creak, they'll find out we've nothing left to take. Finn grinned, all gums and dirt. Gideon's eyes flicked to her, the ghost of a smile buried deep in the corner of his mouth. That was how they'd begun to hold each other now, not with grand gestures, but with the small, steady looks that said, I see you. I see the work you do to stay. By midday, the sun broke through the clouds. Anna shrugged out of her shawl, sleeves rolled to her elbows as she knelt at the patch of garden behind the barn. She drove her fingers into the soil, felt the stubborn clods loosen. Some would call it backbreaking. To her, it felt like proof she was still here, still breathing in a place that hadn't always wanted her alive. She heard Gideon's boots crunch. Up behind her before she felt his shadow block the sun. Earth's still cold, he said. You'll ruin your hands. She looked up at him, hair stuck to her brow. They're already ruined. Might as well do something worth the ache. He knelt beside her, boots sinking deep. Let me. She almost laughed. You don't know. The first thing about planting, then show me, so she did. They worked side by side, shoulders bumping now and again, hands slick with black earth. He asked questions when he didn't know how deep for the seed, how wide for the row. He listened when she answered, really listened, the way no one ever had before. Finn came bounding around the corner at some point, a coil of rope in his arms. Miss. Anna, there's a trapper down at the crossing. Says he's got fresh pelts, wants to trade. Gideon rocked back on his heels. Culver sent him up? Finn shrugged. Just said he saw smoke. New folks were living here now. Thought we'd want good furs before next winter. Anna wiped sweat from her cheek with the back of her wrist. Go with him? She asked Gideon. Gideon hesitated, eyes darting toward the trail. Then he nodded. I'll have a word. You two stay here. Anna watched them ride out, Gideon upright in the saddle. Finn perched behind like a crow on a fence post. Chatter. Rising and falling until the trees swallowed them whole. She stood there for a long time after the hoofbeats faded. Palm pressed to the fence rail, it struck her how empty the yard could feel when they were gone. How once that emptiness would have been a mercy, nobody to watch her, nobody to hush her if she spoke too loud. Now it felt like a missing heartbeat. She went back to the garden, forced her hands to keep moving. Row by row, seed by stubborn seed. She laid down the fragile beginnings of what she hoped might grow when the world was ready. They didn't return by dusk. The sun dipped behind the ridge, dragging the chill with it. She set a lamp in the window, flame flickering at the glass like a signal. She told herself they were just trading, that Gideon knew how to handle a stranger. But the worry lodged in her chest like a stone she couldn't swallow. When hooves finally crunched the road, she was already standing at the window. Two shadows dismounted near the porch. She could see Finn's grin in the lamplight, the bundle of pelts slung over his shoulder. Gideon's face stayed shadowed under his hat brim. Anna unlatched the door before he could knock. Finn slipped past her, boots muddy, cheeks pink with cold. Trapper was an old squint, he said between puffs of breath. Didn't have much to say, but his furs were good. Gideon stepped in behind, boots thudding on the threshold. He smelled of smoke and pine and something older gun oil, maybe, or the memory of it. Everything all right? She asked. He studied her a moment too long, then he nodded. For now, she knew better than to push. She took his coat, draped it on the peg, brushed her palm across his shoulder as she passed. He caught her wrist just for a second one squeeze. Firm enough to say he was still here, still watching the shadows beyond the tree line. They ate late that night. Salt pork, beans, a scrap of bread left over from the morning. Finn talked so fast he stumbled over his words, filling the quiet with stories about the trapper's old dog, the swollen creek, the smell of wood smoke that clung to the crossing. Anna caught Gideon's gaze over the boy's head. She mouthed, "Trouble?" He shook his head once, but his jaw stayed tight when Finn finally collapsed onto his bunk by the stove. Snoring before his boots were even off, Gideon settled into the chair across from her. He laid his forearms on the table, broad palms open. Heard. Talk, he said, voice low. Man down at the crossing said there's a pair of bounty riders asking after a woman fits your description. Anna felt her ribs clamp down, breath shallow. And you didn't tell me before? Would it have changed the stew? She wanted to snap at him. Instead, she pressed her palms flat to the table, grounding herself in the rough grain. What? Do they know? She asked. Not enough, not yet. Then they will, his mouth twitched, maybe not. She stared at him, searching his face for fear, for doubt, found neither. Just that same steady promise she'd seen the night. They married unplanned, unspoken, but they're all the same. You ever wish you'd let that train roll on without me?" She asked suddenly. He looked at her like she'd grown another head. "Never." She leaned back, bone-tired. "They'll come, Gid. You know they will." "Let 'em," he said. "House stands because we stand in it. That's the bargain." They fell quiet, the only sound the pop of the hearth and Finn's soft snore. After a while, Gideon rose, circled the table, and cupped her face in his calloused palms. His thumb brushed under her eye like he could wipe away the shadow of her old fear. "Get some sleep," he murmured. "We'll wake up in the same place. Tomorrow, that's what matters." She let him guide her to the stairs. She lay awake long after he settled into the rocker by the fire. Boots crossed at the ankles, shotgun within arm's reach. Tomorrow they'd rise to the creek's chatter, to Finn's clumsy whistling, to the garden waiting under a stubborn crust of frost. Tomorrow, maybe, they'd see the riders come up the trail with old debts on their tongues. But tonight they were here, together. And outside, the creek ran full, whispering that even what tried hardest to freeze you through would break open when the sun was ready to rise. They woke to rain. Not the gentle mist of spring, but a hard, cold downpour that drummed on the roof and turned the yard to a pit of churned brown soup. Anna lay in bed along while listening to it, counting each steady patter as if she could measure her fear against the sound. Below her, the cabin creaked and settled, the old wood complaining against another wet day it had to survive. Gideon's footsteps came first. His boots thumped against the floorboards, each step a reassurance that the worst things out there had not yet come inside. He paused at the foot of the stairs. She heard the hush of his voice, the scrape of the rocker, the low murmur that meant he was checking the latch again. She imagined him standing at the window, eyes sweeping the tree line for any sign of a rider who might come demanding what was never theirs to begin with. By the time she came down, Finn was fussing with the stove, trying to coax flame from damp kindling. He looked up at her, hair stuck flat to his forehead, grin wide despite the gloom. "Mornin', Miss Anna. Stove's fightin' me today." She smiled small but real. "Let me help you. We'll get it fed yet." Gideon leaned in the corner, arms folded, watching. Always watching these days, though not in the way her first husband had. There was no threat in the way Gideon held a room. Only the certainty that he would stand between her and the world's sharp teeth if he had to. "Trail's washed out," he said when she glanced his way. "Creek's high. No wagons'll make it through today." Anna set a pot of beans on the stovetop, letting the smell of garlic and old pork fill the cracks the rain tried to worm through. "So they're stuck same as us," she said. Her voice felt braver when she used it around him. "Stuck," Gideon agreed. But his jaw worked under his beard, something unspoken shifting behind his eyes. By midday, the rain let up just enough for Finn to brave the yard. He dashed between the bunkhouse and the barn with armfuls of straw for the horses, boots slopping through mud. Anna watched him through the window, the way his thin frame danced across the churned earth like a boy who didn't know yet what it meant to lose something he couldn't get back. She turned to find Gideon at her shoulder. He rested a hand on her back, warm and solid. "He's got the run of the place now," he said. Never seeing him laugh like that when he first came, Anna leaned into the weight of his palm. "He's not the only one changed." Gideon didn't argue. He only pressed a kiss to the back of her head, breath stirring the loose hairs at her nape. That evening, thunder rolled far off to the west. Gideon lit the lamps early. Anna set out the rough bread she'd baked that morning, laying out tin plates while Finn slurped stew straight from his spoon. "Slow down," she teased. "You'll wear a hole in that bowl." Finn grinned, cheeks round with food. "Ain't nothing wrong with being hungry." "No," Gideon said quietly, "but it's a good thing to remember you're not starving anymore." Anna looked at him, the words snagging something deep in her chest. He met her eyes, a softness there that wasn't pity, but pride, a quiet pride she didn't quite know how to hold yet. When the meal was done, Finn dragged a stool near the hearth and started plucking at the old banjo Gideon had traded for years ago and never learned to play. The notes came thin and sour, but he didn't care. His humming rose above the tuneless plink of the strings, filling the corners of the cabin that still remembered too much silence. Anna cleaned the dishes slow, letting the soapy water warm her raw knuckles. Gideon came up behind her, resting, his palm on her hip. She leaned back just enough to feel the press of him, no more than that, but enough to know he was there. Always there. You should sleep soon, he murmured. I'll take the first watch tonight. Anna dried her hands and turned, palm flat on his chest. You can't keep standing guard forever. Not forever. Just until I know we've built something that can't be torn down in one night. She thought of the old curtains, the mended roof, the fence line they'd walked until their boots filled with mud. It wasn't much, but it was theirs. She rose on her toes, brushed her mouth across his jaw. It's already stronger than you think. Gideon's smile flickered, quick, soft, gone again behind the old worry that never quite left him. He stepped back, lifted the shotgun from its hook, and moved to the door. Get some sleep, he said again. She didn't argue. She knew the ritual by now. Upstairs she lay beneath the patched quilt, Finn's off-key plucking drifting up through the floorboards. Each note was a stitch in the patchwork of this new life, crooked, imperfect, but holding fast. She dreamed of snow that night. Not the biting wind that had chased her from the depot bench, but a soft drift of flakes that fell on the cabin roof and melted as soon as they touched the warm shingles. In her dream, she stood at the fence line, Gideon beside her, Finn tugging at her sleeve, asking if the seeds they'd buried would bloom when the snow gave way. She woke to the sound of boots shifting on the porch. Not Gideon's, these were too many, too heavy. The low murmur of men's voices crawled under the door. Scraping her awake dot, she slipped from the bed, bare feet cold on the planks. At the window she saw them, 3 shapes on horseback, rain-slicked dusters flaring in the wind. One had already dismounted, hands shoved deep in his pockets like he owned the place. Her breath caught. She turned, found Finn blinking up at her from his pallet by the stove. She pressed a finger to her lips. He nodded, eyes wide, and ducked behind the rocker. Gideon's voice rose, a low, measured calm she'd heard only once before. When he'd told the first pair of outlaws they had no right to what stood under his roof. She strained to catch the words. You got business here. Speak it plain. Don't mean no harm, came the reply, thick with a drawl she didn't recognize. Just heard a rumor there's a woman here used to belong to a man who's owed some reckonin'. Figured we'd ask polite before we started diggin'. Anna's knees wanted to fold. She braced herself on the sill, eyes locked on Gideon's broad back. He hadn't stepped off the porch. He hadn't let them cross that threshold. You're looking for ghosts, Gideon said. Ain't none here but mine. The man laughed, a low snort that made the hair at Anna's nape stand up. Ghosts got a way of wearin' new skins. Come dawn, maybe we peel this place back and see what's hidin' underneath. Silence. She watched Gideon shift his weight, the way his hand dropped to the shotgun at his side. The rain started up. Again, a soft patter that masked the breath she was trying so hard to keep quiet. Last chance, Gideon said, voice like gravel. You ride on now, you live to see another town. You stay, you'll see how fast a ghost can bleed you dry. The men didn't answer, but the shuffle of boots, the creak of saddle leather, told her they weren't leaving yet. Gideon stepped backward through the door, latch clicking shut behind him. He turned to find Anna already halfway down the stairs. They won't go, she said. They won't stop. He crossed to her in 2 strides, fingers wrapping around her wrist, grounding her. Then we don't stop either. Finn poked his head up from behind the rocker, dirt smudged across his cheek. Miss Anna. Should I run to Culver's? She knelt, brushed his hair back. Not yet, love, not yet. Gideon pressed his forehead to hers, breath warm. If they come at dawn, they come for both of us. They need to know you're not theirs to take. Anna felt the old fear scrabble at her ribs, the cold claws of memory trying to tear holes in her resolve. She shut her eyes, let the sound of the rain fill the space where the fear wanted to live. When she opened them, her voice was steady. Then, we make sure the land remembers our names more than theirs. Outside, thunder cracked like a promise. And inside, 3 people held fast to a quiet so deep it could drown every lie the world might bring to their door. Dawn crept in on a whisper of blue-gray light, slipping through the cracks in the shutters like a secret Anna wished she could keep to herself. She lay awake long before the first bird dared break the hush, eyes fixed on the beams overhead. Below, the slow rhythm of Gideon's boots pacing the porch beat out a steady promise. Not today. Not yet. When she finally rose, the cabin was already warm with the low burn of the stove. Finn sat cross-legged by the hearth, blanket wrapped around his shoulders, eyes darting to the door every time a board creaked. He looked smaller this morning, like the boy he really was, all knobby knees and 2 big dreams tucked into borrowed boots. Anna crouched by him, brushing his hair back with the same gentleness she used to mend seams. You sleep at all? He shrugged. Some. She wanted to tell him everything would be fine, but she'd promised herself she'd never lie to this boy. Not like she'd been lied to when she was his age, told the world was a place where good men always won and bad. Ones rode off with their tails tucked. Some lessons you learned hard and young. She would not pretend otherwise. Gideon came in with the sunrise slung across his shoulders. He smelled of wet pine and gun oil, coat dripping from where the mist had settled overnight. He crossed to the table, setting down the battered shotgun like a preacher laying down a Bible. 3 horses tied off by the creek bed. He said without looking up, "They're waiting for us to come out soft." Anna straightened, feeling her spine find its steel. "And if we don't?" He looked at her then, eyes tired but unbroken. "Then they come in. And they find out how deep this dirt will bury them." She busied herself with the kettle, fingers steady as she measured out the grounds. The sharp bite of coffee grounded her, cut through the knot in her chest. Finn's eyes tracked her every movement, wide as a newborn foal's. "They're bad men, ain't they?" he asked Gideon. Gideon nodded once. "The kind that like taking what don't belong to 'em." Finn's chin jutted stubborn. "We ain't theirs." "No," Anna said, voice soft but certain. "We never were." They ate breakfast standing, each chewing more silence than bread. Anna caught Gideon's hand when he reached for his hat. She traced the scar that snaked across his knuckles, a mark from some fight long before her time, back when his name was a warning whispered down saloon bars. "You ever wish you'd left that man behind?" she asked. He met her eyes without flinching. "Some pieces come with you whether you want him or not. The trick's knowing when to let him loose again." She nodded, letting her thumb linger on his pulse. It thudded calm and sure under her touch. Whatever storm waited outside, his heartbeat said they'd stand in it together. Outside, the rain had given way to a low fog that wrapped the yard in a hush. It made everything feel closer: the fence line, the lean-to, the half-rotten shed that might hold or collapse depending on the wind's mood. Anna stepped out with Gideon, the old rifle balanced in her hands like a truth she'd never thought she'd hold again. "You sure?" he asked, gaze flicking to the gun. She settled the butt into her shoulder, testing the weight. "I'm sure." He gave a soft grunt that might have been approval, or maybe grief for the world that made her certain she'd need to know how to use it. Finn hovered behind them, boots sucking at the mud. He kept his eyes on the ridge, squinting for shapes where the fog broke and pooled. "They'll wait till near full light," Gideon murmured. "They want to see what they're taking." "Let 'em look," Anna said. "Let 'em see we're not something they can drag behind a horse." The words tasted strange in her mouth, sharp, like whiskey. Stronger than she remembered herself being, time-stretched. The sun rose slow behind the clouds, gold bleeding through the gray. Finn fidgeted, arms hugging his skinny chest. Anna rested her free hand on his shoulder, grounding him as much as herself. When the riders finally came into view, it was almost a mercy. The waiting had eaten holes in her already. 3 men, all draped in dusters heavy with trail grime. They didn't bother to hide their weapons. The lead one rode easy, reins slack, smile wide as a knife. "Morning," he called, voice too bright for the dark under his eyes. "Heard tell there's a woman here belong to someone who wants her back." Gideon shifted, one boot digging into the porch boards. "She belongs to no one." The rider tipped his hat, grin never wavering. "Ain't how her old man tells it." Anna stepped forward before her legs could remind her what fear felt like. The fog swallowed the tremor in her breath. "You come to take me?" she asked, voice clear as creek water in the thaw. "You think you can drag me by my hair like you did before?" The man's grin twitched, flickering into something uglier. "Didn't figure you'd have the nerve to show that pretty face." Gideon's arm brushed hers steady, silent. The air felt too thin to hold what her ribs wanted to do. She sucked in the cold and let her next words cut through it. "You tell him he can come himself if he wants me so bad. Send his dogs, and they'll die here same as him." For a moment, nothing. Then the man laughed a short bark that didn't reach his. "Eyes, you hear that, boys? Lady's got bark now." He leaned forward, spitting into the dirt. "I'll say this polite once. Move aside. Let us bring her back. Or we light this place up like kindling." Gideon's voice landed soft but solid. "Try." They didn't rush. Men like that always wanted the show first. The lead rider nudged his horse forward, hand drifting low to his hip. Finn's breath hitched behind Anna, but he didn't run. He stayed, his small shape pressed to her side like a shadow that refused to be left behind. Anna felt the rifle stock dig into her shoulder. The lead man's eyes flicked to it, sneered. "You think you can drop me before I take your throat out?" She didn't flinch. "I don't have to. I just have to make you wonder." The first shot cracked the air before she even felt her finger. "Pull!" Gideon's shotgun roared with it, thunder rolling up the ridge. The lead rider tumbled backward, horse screaming as it tore loose. The other 2 scrambled, boots slipping in the mud as they fumbled for their guns. Anna didn't think. There was no time for thinking. She moved like the woman she'd buried years ago. One squeeze of the trigger, the second man jerked sideways. He didn't fall dead. She hadn't aimed for the kill. Didn't need to. Blood sprayed the fence post, bright against the fog. Gideon roared her name just once, sharp enough to bring her back from the black edge. She blinked, breath ragged, finding him standing firm at the porch rail, the last rider frozen in the saddle, gun halfway raised. "You want this?" Gideon asked the man. His voice was so calm it made Anna's knees quake. "You want to carry his story back in your teeth? Or you want to ride out now with both legs still under you?" The man's horse shifted, steam rising off its flanks. He spat in the mud, eyes flicking between the bodies, and the barrel pointed square at his chest. "This ain't over," he hissed. "No," Anna said before Gideon could. "But it won't end the way he thinks." The man turned his horse slow, boots slick with the same mud she'd once thought would swallow her whole. He didn't look back. When the yard went quiet again, Anna's knees gave. She felt Gideon's arm catch her before the rifle slipped from her grasp. Finn burst from behind the rail, burying his face against her hip, small shoulders shaking with all the fear he hadn't shown before. They stayed like that, 3 souls braced against the dawn. The bodies cooling in the mud a reminder that some things didn't come back when you sent them away. That some debts didn't get collected without leaving a piece of yourself in the dirt. Gideon's hand closed over hers. She felt the warmth of it sink into her bones like a promise she no longer needed spoken out loud. He didn't ask if she was sorry. He didn't ask if she'd sleep tonight. He just held her hand tight enough that when the rain came again, washing the blood into the roots of the grass, she knew they would stand here come next thaw, and the thaw after that, and all the winters yet to come. And for once in her life, Anna Hale believed the land would remember her name more than theirs. The storm broke that night as if the sky itself had been holding its breath, waiting for the gun smoke to clear before letting the rain come down in earnest. Anna sat by the window long after the bodies were buried out by the fence line. 3 mounds, each marked with nothing but a stone. No names carved to tell the world who had come here thinking they could own her future. Inside, the cabin felt smaller than ever. The stove crackled, but the walls held the chill like a stubborn ghost. Finn had curled himself so tight on the pallet near the hearth that Anna wondered if he'd ever uncoil again. She watched him breathe, counted each rise and fall of his ribs like it might make the world hold together a little longer. Gideon stood on the porch, backlit by the lantern he'd hung from the crossbeam. His shape cut a dark line through the rain that sluiced off his hat brim and spattered the boards at his feet. Every so often he'd shift his weight, cocking his head to listen for hoofbeats that never came. She wished he'd come inside, let the storm carry their worry away without a witness. But he would stand there till dawn, if that's what it took to keep the shadows at the tree line. When she could stand the waiting no longer, she pulled her shawl tight around her shoulders and stepped outside. The rain found every seam in her clothes, needling through to her skin like ice. Gideon didn't look at her when she stopped beside him. He just let out a breath that misted in the lantern glow. "Fence'll hold," he murmured. "Long enough anyway." Anna leaned her hip against the post. "And after that?" He tipped his hat back, eyes gone pale in the half-light. "After that, we build it again." The words landed heavier than the rain. She thought of the way the fence had looked this morning, rails patched with raw cuts, fresh nails hammered through old rot. It would stand, but not because it was strong. It would stand because they refused to let it fall. "You ever get tired of it?" she asked. "Mending what don't want to stay mended." He turned to her then, really turned, water dripping from the tip of his nose. "Every day." "Doesn't mean I stop." She wanted to say something soft, something that would cut through the ache in her chest, but the words wouldn't come. So she leaned into his side instead, felt the broad heat of him under the soaked wool. He slid his arm around her waist, thumb stroking the small of her back through the damp shawl. They stayed that way until the thunder faded to a dull growl. The rain eased to a hiss in the cottonwoods, and somewhere behind them, Finn's restless sleep broke into the muffled warble of a child's dream. Gideon pressed a kiss to her temple, slow as a promise. "Come inside, Anna. You'll freeze." She let him guide her in, boots shedding mud on the threshold. He closed the door behind them and set the shotgun back in its place beside the window, a habit now like breathing. Finn stirred as they passed, blinking up at them with eyes bleary but awake. "Did they go?" he asked, voice small as the crackling embers. "They went," Anna said, kneeling to tuck the blanket tighter around his shoulders. "And if any more come, they'll find the same end." Finn's lashes fluttered, heavy with exhaustion that sleep couldn't quite chase away. "Ain't scared of them," he mumbled. "I know," she whispered. She pressed a kiss to his forehead, tasting the salt of old tears washed clean by rain. When she rose, Gideon was waiting by the rocker. He sat first, then held out a hand. She sank into his lap, the chair creaking under the weight of two people who'd spent too many nights sitting alone in the dark. His hand found the edge of her shawl, tugged it closer around her shoulders. "You did good today." He sat against her hair. She let out a breath that rattled in her throat. "I killed a man, Gid." His chin rested on her crown. "No, you saved this place. You saved us." She wanted to believe that. Some part of her did. But another part, the part that still saw her first husband's boot heel on the steps. The bottle glinting in his hand, wondered what price this land would ask of her next. She closed her eyes, listening to the steady thud of Gideon's heart beneath her ear. The rain drummed on the roof like a lullaby out of tune. "You think the ground remembers?" she asked, voice barely a breath. "What? The dead, the blood. You think the dirt keeps it, holds it against us?" He didn't answer right away. His palm stroked up and down her spine, slow and sure. "Maybe it does," he said at last. "But maybe that's why things grow so strong when the thaw comes. All that's buried feeds what rises." She let those words root themselves deep, the way seeds took hold under frost. She let herself believe that this patch of earth could be more than a graveyard of old ghosts. Hours passed like that, rain easing to mist, the fire dropping to coals. She drifted in and out of sleep against his chest, waking only when his arm shifted to carry her up the narrow stairs. He laid her in the bed with a gentleness that made her eyes sting worse than any old bruise ever had. "Sleep," he said. "I'll be here when you wake." And for once, Anna didn't doubt it. She didn't listen for boots on the porch or the jingle of reins at the gate. She let her eyes close on the image of 3 stones out by the fence. Rain slick and nameless dotted dawn. The world smelled clean again, mud, pine, a sweetness under the smoke. Anna woke to Gideon's shape in the doorway, Finn's chatter drifting up from the yard. She rose and wrapped her shawl around her shoulders, the fringe brushing her raw knuckles like a blessing. She stepped out onto the stoop and found Finn by the garden patch, scraping away the sodden top layer to check if the shoots had survived. The storm. He turned, face smudged with dirt and hope. "Look," he said, pointing to a tender curl of green. "Didn't drown. Didn't die." Anna knelt in the mud, touching the seedling with the tip of her finger. It trembled but didn't fall. She felt Gideon come up behind her, the shadow of his hand warm on her back. "Next fence'll need building soon," he said. "Let it come," Anna murmured. She looked up at him, saw her own grit reflected in the crease at the corner of his mouth. Together they turned back to the garden, small, stubborn, alive. A patch of green fed by all the things they'd buried and refused to let win. And somewhere past the mist and the cottonwoods, the world held its breath, waiting to find out just how deep their roots would go. The wind shifted in the second week after the storm, carrying the scent of the thaw deeper into the valley. Each morning, Anna stepped out to the porch and felt the ground soften a little more under her boots, like it, too, was tired of holding the cold so close to its bones. She found comfort in that slow surrender, the way the earth yielded to sun and rain, stubborn things giving way without ever really breaking. Gideon spent his dawns at the fence line again, hammering in new rails, where the weight of the rain had buckled the old ones. She watched him from the stoop some days, a cup of coffee warming her palms while she studied the shape of his back, the set of his shoulders. Each strike of his hammer felt like a wordless promise. "This holds. This stays." Finn took to following him, trailing along the fence like a loyal pup, handing him nails and asking questions no boy should ever have to learn answers to. "What do we do if they come at night? What do we do if they bring fire? What do we do if they come when we're not ready?" And always, Gideon answered the same way, low voice, patient eyes, a hand on the boy's shoulder to still the quake in him. "We stand. We stand. We stand." When the last board was in place, Anna walked the length of it herself, palm brushing the raw grain where new wood met old. She could feel the join, the scar of it, but the fence stood just the same. Stronger. Maybe, for the places it had split before. Inside, the cabin hummed with the quiet work of being alive. Anna scrubbed the window glass until her reflection shone back in her lined, tired, but hers. She stitched new curtains from a bolt of muslin that had waited years for the right hands. She coaxed life back into the stove's old iron belly. Baking loaves so dense they felt like stone but made Finn grin wide when he tore into them, crumbs dusting his chin. Some nights, Gideon still stood watch at the door. She knew better than to try and talk him inside before he'd convinced himself. The ridge held no new threat. Instead, she'd settle by the window, candle burning low, stitching the frayed edges of the world, together one thread at a time. When she woke in the dark to find him finally slipping under the quilt beside her, she didn't speak, she only pressed. Her hand to his chest, felt the steady drum of his heart, and let that be enough. The days turned bright again. The ground dried enough to take seed. Anna planted with Finn at her side, the two of them kneeling in the stubborn dirt, palms caked. Black, he asked if every seed would grow. She told him not all of them would, but enough would. Enough to feed them come next frost out in town. Word of the last men they'd buried at the fence line blew through like a rumor folks wanted to believe, but didn't dare repeat too loud. Some came up the trail in 2s and 3s neighbors with wary eyes and baskets of preserves to set on Anna's table, as if a jar of jam could stand in for the apology they didn't quite know how to say. She thanked them, hand steady as she took each offering, though she never invited any to stay long. Not yet. She didn't need anyone else's eyes weighing the walls she and Gideon had built around this place, walls made of more than timber. And nails. They were made of vows never spoken, but understood just the same. This land gives us roots. This home holds our ghosts. And what comes for us next will find us standing, not begging. One evening near dusk, Gideon found her out by the garden patch. She sat on an upturned bucket, fingers combing through the first brave shoots poking through the soil. Her dress was streaked with mud. Her sleeves were damp to the elbows. "You're gonna wear your hands to bone," he said, voice low as the crickets stirring in the grass. She didn't look up. Better than letting them go soft again. He squatted beside her, boots sinking into the thawed earth. He reached out, caught her wrist in his rough palm. They were never soft. She turned then, met his eyes in the fading light. The look there made her throat ache, how he saw her without ever flinching from what he saw. He traced his thumb over the inside of her wrist, the tender place where her pulse beat fast and fragile. "What you did, that day they came most. Men I've known wouldn't have had the steel." Anna shook her head. "It wasn't steel. It was the only choice left. Doesn't make it weigh less." She let him hold her there a moment, the damp earth soaking into the hem of her skirt, the dusk breathing cool over their shoulders. The fence line stretched behind him, new rails, new nails, old scars hidden by the gathering dark. "You still think they'll come again?" she asked. His eyes drifted to the ridge, the shadowed tree line. "If not him, then another like him. Men who think a woman alone is something to claim. Men who don't know yet what it means to knock here." Anna lifted her chin. "Then let him come." His mouth twitched half a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes, but warmed her all the same. He let her go only to thread his fingers through hers, tugging her up off the bucket. She stumbled, boots slipping in the mud, but his grip held firm. They walked the fence line together, dusk swallowing the yard in shades of ash and violet. Finn's laughter carried from the porch where he whittled nonsense shapes from scrap woodproof, small and stubborn, that a boy could find joy. In the ruins of old fear, when they reached the far corner where the fence met the rise above the creek, Gideon stopped. He tugged her hand until she turned to face him. "Got something for you," he said, voice soft as a lullaby she'd never learned to sing. She frowned as he dug in his coat pocket. Out came a scrap of leather, folded neat. He pressed it into her palm, his thumb brushing the edge. She opened it. Inside lay a thin band of brass rough, hammered by some hand that knew more about fence rails than finery. A ring, nothing fancy, but hers. "I know it's not," he started. She cut him off with a laugh that cracked open something tight in her ribs. "It's perfect." He ducked his head, color rising under the grime on his cheeks. Didn't want you thinking you were just here because of a deal, because of what was owed. She slipped the ring onto her finger, feeling the weight of it settle like a stone in calm water. I know why I'm here. Gideon lifted her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss. To the brass band. And why's that? Anna tilted her head, eyes tracing the ridgeline where the last bruises of sunset held on for dear life. Because I chose to stay, same as you. He grinned then, a rare, wide thing that made him look younger than the years carved into the lines around his eyes. He held her close enough to feel the laugh in his chest when she said it again, softer, for just him. I chose this. The wind rattled the cottonwoods, carrying the scent of fresh-turned soil and river mud. She breathed it in, felt it coat her tongue like a promise. Roots that dig deeper each time the storm tries to tear them out. They stood there till the dark swallowed the last light, hands locked together over the fence that would hold another season, another trial, another thaw. And when they finally turned back toward the cabin, the flicker of the lamp in the window was enough to guide them home. Anna woke before the sun that morning, the cabin still wrapped in the hush that came before a new day took its first breath. She lay for a moment, staring at the rafters, listening to the steady rasp of Gideon's breathing beside her. In the quiet, the ring on her finger felt heavier than she'd expected, a small circle of brass that held so much more than its shape. She slipped from the bed without waking him, bare feet cold on the planks. Outside the window, the dark still clung to the ridge, but the horizon was already bleeding pale gold into the tree line. She pulled her shawl close around her shoulders and stepped onto the porch. Finn was there already. She found him perched on the top rail, arms hugging his knees, face turned toward the sky as if he could will the dawn to break faster. "You're up early," she said, voice soft to keep from startling him. He glanced over his shoulder, grinned. Small but bright in the half-light. Didn't sleep much. Too many dreams. Anna stepped closer, resting her palm on the rail beside his bare foot. "Bad ones?" He shook his head. "Some bad, some good. The good ones are worse sometimes. 'Cause you wake up and they ain't real yet." She knew that feeling in her bones, the ache of wanting something so badly you could taste it, only to find the taste gone with the morning. She reached up, ruffled his hair until he squirmed, and laughed under his breath. "Come inside. There's coffee left from last night. Not much, but warm." Finn slipped down, bare feet splashing in the mud where the rain had left puddles that still hadn't dried. He stomped the worst of it off on the stoop and bounded inside ahead of her. She found Gideon leaning against the stove when she stepped back in, one hand wrapped around a chipped tin cup. He looked at her like he always did when the day was just starting, like he was checking to make sure she was still real, still here. "Couldn't sleep?" he asked, didn't want to waste the light. She moved past him, brushing her fingers across his wrist. His skin was warm from the stove, and she let that heat seep into her before pulling away to pour what was left of the coffee into Finn's cup. They ate bread and dried meat by the window, the three of them squeezed onto the bench seat that Gideon had built his first winter here. The wood creaked under their weight, but it held like everything else they'd patched and repatched until it felt strong enough to trust. After, they moved through the cabin like bees in a hive, each claiming some small piece of the day. Gideon hauled fresh straw to the barn. Finn followed him with an armload of rope, asking questions so fast they tripped over each other. Anna stayed behind to scrub the hearth, her hands working the soot from the stones until her knuckles burned raw. She needed the burn. Needed to feel something more honest than the dull buzz that filled her head every time she thought about the three men in the ground beyond the fence line. She didn't regret it, not really. But she wondered what the land did with all that spilled blood. Did it feed the roots like Gideon said? Or did it just soak in, heavy and sour, waiting to rise up again when the thaw came back around? She paused, bracing her hand on the mantel, breath coming hard. The window by the table gave her a slice of the yard Gideon's shape moving through the mud, Finn trailing behind. The sun was up now, soft and bright enough to make the porch look almost new. They'd talked of new boards, new paint, maybe even a new roof come fall. She let herself imagine it for a moment, a roof that didn't leak when the rain turned mean, walls that didn't shudder when the wind rattled its teeth. A home that could keep them safe when the world decided to test what they'd built. She felt the ring on her finger again, catching on the rag she'd tied around her hand. A promise hammered out by a man who'd once only known how to hold. A gun. She touched it with her thumb, felt the edge where he hadn't filed it smooth. She liked that it wasn't perfect. None of this was. But it was real. A noise on the trail snapped her head up. Hoofbeats. Not many, two, maybe three, but enough to make her breath snag in her chest. She crossed to the window, heart thudding against her ribs like it wanted out. Gideon had already stepped out of the barn, pitchfork in one hand, eyes fixed on the bend in the road. Finn hovered behind him, too close. She saw Gideon gesture, get back, but the boy only shifted to stand at his side. The riders came slow. She could see now. It was two men, both dressed in coats too fine for the trail, dust rising from their horses' flanks like ghosts trying to keep up. One lifted a hand in greeting as they drew closer, but Gideon didn't move to meet them halfway. Anna stepped outside, rifle balanced in the crook of her arm. The air tasted of thaw and old fear. "Morning," the lead rider called when he saw her. His voice was smooth, the kind that slipped through cracks and stayed behind when the man was gone. "Hope we're not intruding." Gideon shifted the pitchfork in his grip, the prongs catching the light like teeth. "Depends what you've come for." The man laughed, though his eyes didn't match the sound. "Just passing word, is all. There's talk in town, some folks saying there's a price still hanging on that woman of yours." Anna felt the barrel of the rifle settle against her shoulder, familiar now in a way that made her stomach turn. "Is that so?" The rider looked at her, then really looked, his eyes slipping from her face to the ring on her finger. "Some say it's not worth much. Others figure anything left unclaimed is worth taking." Gideon's voice dropped low. "And which are you?" The man's grin flickered. "Oh, we ain't here to collect. Not today. Just figured you'd want to know which way the wind's blowing. Lot of hungry mouths drifting through the valley these days. Desperate men do desperate things." Anna felt the fear trying to crawl back up her throat. She swallowed it down. "You think you're doing us a kindness, bringing that news here?" The rider shrugged, reins tight in his gloved hands. "Call it what you like. Just don't say nobody told you when they come knocking next." He nudged his horse, turning it with a snap of his wrist. The other rider hadn't spoken a word, just tipped his hat as they wheeled around and headed back down the trail. Gideon didn't move until the hoofbeats faded into the cottonwoods. Then he looked at her, pitchfork still clutched tight. "They'll come," he said. "Not a question. Just the truth." Anna lowered the rifle, breath easing out of her in a ragged line. "Let him." Finn pushed past Gideon, eyes wide. "Do we run?" She turned to him, dropped to one knee so they were face to face. "We don't run. Not ever again." Gideon came to stand behind her, his hand settling on her shoulder, the weight of it steadying her like the earth after a long storm. "They'll ride in thinking they know this place," he said. "Thinking they know you. But they don't know what you've built." Anna looked past the garden to the fence line that held the ground where old ghosts lay buried. She thought of the seeds pushing their way up through blood and frost alike. "They'll learn," she said. Her voice didn't shake. She rose, rifle balanced easy in her arms. Finn took her free hand. Gideon's palm pressed warm against her back, and together they stood in the yard as the wind shifted, carrying the promise of trouble. With it, and the promise, too, that when it came, they'd stand their ground, whatever roots it cost to hold. The night after the riders brought their warning, sleep slipped from Anna like water through a cracked bucket. She lay with her eyes open to the beams overhead, counting each creak and sigh of the old cabin until the darkness felt thick enough to drown in. Beside her, Gideon breathed slow and deep, one arm draped across her waist like he could hold the world back with nothing but his body. When she couldn't bear the hush any longer, she slid free of the covers and padded down the stairs. The floor was cold under her feet, but the chill kept her thoughts sharp. In the glow of the dying hearth, she found the kettle and set it on to boil, the clank of iron a small comfort against the silence pressing at the windows. She poured herself a cup when it was ready. The bitter taste rough on her tongue, she didn't mind. She wanted it rough. Something to remind her she was still here, still capable of standing when the dark wanted her to fold. A sound from the porch made her stiffen, cup halfway to her lips. She heard the door creak, no knock, no warning. But she didn't reach for the rifle leaning by the window. She knew that step. She knew the weight of it on the boards. Gideon stepped inside, coat dripping rainwater onto the floorboards. He'd been outside again, pacing the fence line even in the black hour when most men trusted the shadows to stay where they belonged. "You should rest," she said, voice low to keep from waking Finn where he lay curled on the pallet by the hearth. Gideon pushed the door closed with his boot. "Same could be said for you," she shrugged, sipped the coffee. He crossed the room, took the cup from her hand, and drank the last mouthful himself. When he set it down, he cupped her face with one calloused palm. "Can't watch the line all night," she whispered. His thumb traced the hollow beneath her eye, the tired shadow there. "I know. But I can stand there long enough that whoever's thinking of testing us tonight thinks better of it." She laughed, though it came out more like a sigh. "You think they're that smart?" He dropped his hand, stepped back. "Smart enough to know dying in the mud for another man's claim ain't worth the trouble." Anna turned to the window, pushed aside the curtain just enough to see the yard. The garden rows were little more than scars in the dark soil now, each sprout fragile and new. Beyond that, the fence gleamed wet under the moon's thin light. "You remember what you said," she murmured. "About roots growing strong in blood?" "I remember." She let the curtain fall. "I'm starting to believe it." He made a noise in his throat, something between a grunt and a chuckle. "Good, because there's talk in town. Culver says the same men who rode through might have gone west, stirring up others who think we're an easy mark." Anna leaned against the table, arms crossed tight to keep the tremor out of her hands. "We're not easy." "No," Gideon agreed. "We're not." They stood like that a long while, two silhouettes drawn together by the hush between storms. When she finally stepped to him, he wrapped her up tight, pressing his lips to her hairline. He smelled of wet pine and cold iron, the scent that always brought her back from the edge of the old fear. "You go back up," he said. "Get a few more hours. I'll wake you at dawn." She almost argued, but she could see the line drawn in the set of his shoulders, one she'd learned not to push when the world outside was close enough to rattle the latch. So she climbed the stairs alone, lay back under the quilt with the weight of his warmth still clinging to her bones. She didn't sleep, not really, but she let her eyes close. She let the sound of the wind against the eaves carry her somewhere softer than the truth. Dawn came pale and bruised, the clouds dragging their bellies over the ridge. Anna found Gideon by the barn when she came down, sleeves rolled, driving nails into the loose boards where the wind had worried them half free. Finn sat cross-legged in the mud nearby, poking at a tangle of wire with a stick, humming to himself like the world hadn't shifted overnight. She crossed the yard, boots sinking into the muck. Gideon straightened when he heard her. Hammer paused. "Mid-swing, sleep?" he asked. "Some." He gestured with his chin at the barn wall. "This old hide's ready to give out. Might be time to think about new planks come summer." Anna ran her palm over the rough grain. "Another thing to mend." He set the hammer down. braced a hand on the beam above her head. You want something that never needs fixing, you'll be waiting a long while. She tilted her chin, met his eyes. I don't mind fixing, long as it's ours. A ghost of a smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. He leaned in, pressed a kiss to her forehead, lingering just long enough to steady the place in her that still wanted to flinch at. Every shadow dot by afternoon, the clouds cracked open again. Rain fell slow and steady, soaking the garden rose until the shoots bent under the weight. Finn splashed through the puddles, bare feet streaked with mud. Laughter sharp and bright against the hush. Anna watched from the stoop, the smell of wet earth and wood smoke curling around her like an old shawl. For a heartbeat, the worry fell away, replaced by the simple truth that right here, was what they'd fought for, not the land, not the boards or rails hammered into place, but the space to stand in the open and say, "This is ours." Try to take it. When Finn ran up, dripping and breathless, she caught him by the shoulders, hands sinking into the warmth of him. "You're half rainwater," she said, pushing his hair back from his forehead. He giggled, eyes squinting against the drip from his lashes. Didn't want it to wash the seeds away. She knelt, boots soaking through, the hem of her dress dragging in the mud. "Nothing's washing us away, Finn, not this time." He ducked his head, cheeks pink with more than the chill. "Promise?" She glanced over her shoulder. Gideon stood by the fence, hammer in hand again, shoulders squared to the ridge beyond. She looked back at Finn, the ring on her finger pressing, warm against his damp skin where her hand cupped his cheek. "Promise." That night, the rain drummed steady on the roof. Gideon stayed in the rocker by the door, shotgun across his lap, the creak of the chair, a heartbeat in the hush. Anna sat on the floor by the hearth, needle in hand, patching the elbow of Finn's shirt for the third time this month. Each pull of the thread tied her tighter to the bones of this place. Finn fell asleep with his head in her lap, breath warm against her thigh, his weight an anchor against the storm that wanted to shake the walls apart. She stitched until her eyes blurred, until the wind rattled the shutters but never broke through. When she finished, she looked up and found Gideon watching her. He didn't smile. He didn't have to. She saw it in the tilt of his head, the softness at the edge of his eyes. The promise was the same one she carried in the ring he'd made for her. A promise older than the boards and the dirt they'd buried their fears in. Whatever comes, we stand. Outside, the rain fell like a hymn, each drop a word they'd already learned by heart. The thaw settled in for good a week later. It didn't ask permission, just arrived one dawn with the last frost gone from the window panes and the creek, out back swollen with meltwater that hummed through the valley like an old hymn. Anna stood barefoot on the porch that morning, toes pressed into the damp wood, watching the sun lift itself over the ridge with all the quiet certainty she'd come to envy. Behind her, Gideon moved through the cabin with the easy hush of a man who had learned to walk gently through someone else's scars. She felt him before she heard him, his hand grazing the curve of her waist as he stepped up beside her, boots thunking soft on the boards. "Frost's gone," he said, his voice still half caught in sleep. She nodded. "So's the fear." He didn't correct her, didn't remind her that fear never really left, just burrowed deeper, waiting for the next hard wind to shake it loose. He only slipped his hand into hers, thumb brushing the brass band that anchored her to this place more than the nails and beams ever could. The garden was half awake already, tender shoots shivering under the weak sun, each a small defiance against the cold nights that would come again. She would remember that small things could stand when the world wanted them to bend. Finn's laughter cracked, the morning open like an egg. He came barreling around the corner of the barn, arms flung wide, boots caked in mud. He nearly collided with Gideon, who caught him by the collar and swung him up onto the rail like he weighed nothing at all. "Easy," Gideon said, but there was a smile in it. Finn beamed at Anna, cheeks flushed. Mr. Gideon says we can ride to town today, says we're stocked enough to trade. Anna arched an eyebrow at the man beside her. You think it's safe? Gideon's eyes never left the boy. Safe as it's gonna be. Safer if they see us riding upright, not hunched like we're waiting for the next boot to drop. She let that settle, the truth of it. She'd spent enough years ducking her head when the world came knocking. She wouldn't do that anymore. Fine, she said, but you're patching that wagon bed before we haul it all the way down the ridge. Last thing we need is to lose half our flour to a pothole. Finn whooped, kicking his heels against the post. Gideon set him down with a soft grunt, ruffling his hair until it stuck out in muddy tufts. After breakfast, Anna packed the tins herself: flour, dried beans, a few jars of the preserves she'd finally trusted the cellar enough to hold through. Winter. Each tin was a small victory, a marker that said they could make it another season without anyone's charity. The brass ring on her finger scraped the edge of the crates as she stacked them, and she liked that. She liked that it was already nicked and dulled with the work of this life. When they hitched the team, the sun had climbed high enough to chase the last slick of frost from the wagon seat. Gideon boosted Finn up first, then turned and offered his hand to Anna. She almost swatted it away. Old reflex. That stubborn piece of her that still wanted to prove she didn't need steadying, but she took it. She took it because he offered it without pity, just that quiet respect that said, I know what it took to get you here. The trail down to town was slick in places, the mud pulling at the wagon wheels like the past tugging at her heels. But she didn't look back, not once. Not even when the fence line disappeared behind the bend. She kept her eyes ahead, one arm braced around Finn's shoulders as he bounced on the seat beside her, pointing out every rabbit track and half-frozen puddle. Like they were treasures instead of reminders of how harsh the valley could be. Culver's store came into view before noon. The sign above the door still hung crooked from the storm 2 months back, but the glass windows gleamed. Fresh paper notices fluttered on the board: out front jobs, warnings, a few scribbled prayers for better weather. The same as always, inside. The warmth smelled of sawdust and pipe smoke. Culver himself shuffled out from behind the barrels, spectacles perched on the tip of his nose. He nodded at Gideon first, then Anna, his gaze lingering on the ring that glinted when she set her basket. On the counter, "Morning, Mrs. Hawley," he said, voice gentler than it had been the last time they'd come through. "Didn't expect you to ride down this soon." Anna kept her chin high. Storms pass. Shelves don't fill themselves. Culver barked a laugh, gesturing to Finn, who was already nosing around the jar of penny sweets. "That one keeping." "You busy?" "Busier than any outlaw could," Gideon said. The trader leaned in, lowering his voice. "You hear the talk? That fella, what's left of his kin, still running their mouths about the price on her head." Anna stiffened, but Gideon laid a hand on the small of her back. A small touch, but enough to ground her. "I hear talk," Gideon said. "I don't hear much action." Culver's mouth twitched. "Fair enough. Just keep your eyes open on the Kofa. Road out. There's folks got less to lose than they ought." Anna squared her shoulders. "If they come, they'll find we're not worth the trouble." Culver lifted his palms. "Didn't mean offense. Just folks talk, that's all." She let it lie. No sense picking a scab that would never truly heal. She busied herself counting the jars of pickled beets, the crates of flour, the nails she'd need for the fence come fall. Finn appeared at her elbow, pockets bulging with sweets she knew full well Culver had slipped him for free. Outside, the air felt different, brighter somehow, even as the wind snapped at her braids. She glanced at Gideon as they loaded the wagon. He caught her look, one eyebrow raised. "What?" he asked. She shook her head. "Feels strange, that's all. Being here and not feeling like the ground's gonna drop out from under us." Gideon tugged on the last strap, leather creaking. "You've earned it, have we?" He climbed up beside her, settling Finn between them. "We're still here. That's earning it enough." They rode back slow. Finn dozed against her side, face sticky with the sugar she didn't have the heart to scrub off yet. Gideon kept the reins loose, one hand resting on her knee, thumb tracing circles that made her heart feel less like something that could shatter if the wind turned mean. When the fence line came back into view, it looked smaller than she remembered. Not because it was weak, but because it was hers, every nail and knot and gap where the wind still slipped through. She'd never seen anything more worth guarding. Gideon helped her down from the wagon, boots splashing into the thawing yard. He didn't say anything when she lingered by the fence, palm pressed to the fresh wood, fingertips finding the groove where he'd carved her name beside his when no one else was watching. Finn tumbled off the seat behind them, whooping as he darted for the garden to check the chutes. Anna turned to Gideon, the chill of the wind caught in her hair. "They'll come again." He didn't flinch. "Let 'em." She traced the scar at his temple, the one that never fully faded. "You'll stand?" His smile was small but steady, always. She took his hand, the brass ring warm where it pressed between their palms. Together, they watched the boy run barefoot through the mud, past the old ghosts and the new roots both. They were not finished fighting. But the fear that had followed her from that train depot felt smaller now, tamed, maybe, by the promise that they would not run, would not bow, they would stand. As long as the land would have them, they would stand. Anna woke to the sound of distant thunder that night, the rumble so low she thought at first it was just a dream, some echo of old fears rattling the beams overhead. But then it came again, closer this time, rolling through the floorboards under her bare feet as she crept to the window. Outside, the yard lay hushed under a silver slice of moon. The fence line glowed pale against the shadows of the cottonwoods beyond. No wind, no rain yet. Just the promise of something coming. Behind her, the bed creaked. Gideon's voice found her in the dark. "It's early yet." She didn't turn. "I know." She felt him move, the warmth of his palm brushing her spine as he came to stand behind her. He smelled of cedar and pipe smoke, a scent that made her pulse steady even when the world threatened to come undone. "You think it's them?" she asked. He didn't answer right away. His hand slipped over her shoulder, thumb tracing the brass ring where it caught the moonlight. "I think it's weather, that's all." But they both knew better. Some storms didn't break just because the sky said they should. She dressed in silence, feet slipping into the boots she kept by the door. Downstairs, the hearth held the last ghost of the day's fire. She stirred it back to life with practiced hands, the pop and hiss of fresh kindling. Loud in the hush. Finn stirred on the pallet near the hearth, eyes blinking open when he heard her move. He sat up, hair a wild halo, sleep still clinging to the corners of his mouth. "Is it morning?" he asked, voice small. Anna crouched beside him, palm on his cheek. "Not yet, but soon." He leaned into her touch, warm and solid. A reminder that the world outside these walls could scrape and batter and threaten all it wanted inside. This was hers. There's doubt by the time dawn slipped its first pale edge over the ridge. Gideon was out walking the fence line. Anna watched him from the stoop, Finn perched beside her, a blanket around his shoulders. The boy's breath puffed little clouds in the chill. "He always walks it?" Finn asked. "Always," she said. "Long as I've known him." Finn frowned. "You afraid they'll come?" Anna's eyes tracked the shape moving along the fence, shoulders squared against the mist. "No, not afraid. Ready." It sounded good. She wanted it to feel true in her bones. But old ghosts didn't always stay buried, and she'd learned the hard way that being ready was more than just the weight of a rifle in your hands. When Gideon came back, boots caked in mud, he handed her the old oilcloth sack he'd kept hidden under the floorboards since before she'd come here. She took it without asking. They both knew what was in it, just in case, he said. She nodded. Just in case. The day stretched long and thin. Clouds banked low over the ridge, heavy enough to smother the light. Anna kept her hands busy washing. The old flour sacks, remending the garden rose Finn had trampled in his last chase after the crows. Each small task felt like a line drawn in the dirt. This is ours. You won't take it without a fight. By late afternoon, the air went still. No breeze, no birds. Even the creek behind the barn sounded hushed, like it was listening for trouble. 2. Anna found Gideon by the split-rail gate, his eyes fixed on the trail that wound up from town. "They'll come before dark," he said. She didn't ask how he knew. She just stepped close enough to feel the heat of him where the wind couldn't. "Reach. Finn stays inside," she said. Gideon's mouth twitched, not quite a smile. "He's got more grit than most men I've known." She pressed a hand to his chest. "Doesn't mean he needs to see it. Not this time." When the first rider crested the ridge, Anna felt her throat tighten. He looked ordinary, hat slouched. Low, coat patched and mud-slick, just another drifter. But she knew better. She knew the shape of a threat when it wore a smile too wide for its eyes. Behind him, 2 more came into view. Younger, maybe, but their posture told her enough, guns slung too easy at the hip. Reins loose like they'd never learned to be afraid of what waited on the other side of a fence. They didn't call out when they saw Gideon standing there. They didn't tip hats or offer soft words like the last ones had. They just stopped a dozen paces back from the gate, horses snorting in the hushed dot. The lead rider pushed his hat back with the barrel of his revolver. "Mornin'," he drawled. "You Gideon Hawley?" Gideon didn't move. "Depends who's asking." The man grinned. "Call me Dunn. Word is you're sheltering a runaway. Some folks figure she ought to come back where she belongs." Anna stepped up beside Gideon, rifle balanced easy against her hip. "You want something, you speak to me." Dunn's eyes flicked to her, lingering on the brass ring. "Ain't that sweet? You playin' house out here, girl? You think a piece of tin's gonna make you his forever?" Gideon's jaw twitched. "You want to turn around now, you might ride out with your legs under you." Dunn barked a laugh, sharp as a bone. Snapping. The 2 boys behind him shifted, hands near their guns but not yet on them. "Truth is," Dunn said, voice oily, "we was told to bring her back. Alive if she don't fuss. Dead if she does." Anna felt the heat drain from her face, but she didn't let the rifle dip. "Who sent you?" Dunn's grin widened. "Man who says what's his stays his, even if he has to drag it home by the hair." Gideon stepped forward, boots squelching in the mud. "You ain't dragging anyone anywhere." The air between them went still as pond water before a snake strike. Anna felt the ghosts press close, old nights, old bruises, old fear coiled like wire in her chest. She drew in a breath that tasted of damp earth, and Ash. Dunn shifted in his saddle. "Last chance, girl. Climb up here like a good wife. We don't have to spill more than your pride today," Anna laughed. It startled even her how sharp it sounded. "You want my pride? Come take it." Dunn's grin died. His hand dropped to his gun. The first shot cracked the hush like thunder. Gideon's rifle roared so close to her ear, she felt the sting in her teeth. Dunn's shoulder snapped back, a burst of red blooming through the slick of his coat. The boys behind him scattered. One veered left, spurring his horse straight for the gate. Anna didn't think, she just lifted her own rifle, sighted down the barrel, and fired. The horse reared, the riders spilled into the mud, a wild cry torn away by the wind. The 3rd man turned tail, boots hammering his horse's flanks until they vanished behind the ridgeline. Dunn lay writhing in the churned dirt, hand clamped to his bleeding shoulder. Gideon stepped forward, rifle aimed easy as breathing. "You ride back," he said, voice low. "You tell the man who sent you he's welcome to come himself. But he'll find this place hungry for men like you." Dunn spat blood. "You think you're something. Just a dirt farmer and a used up girl. He'll come." Anna crouched beside him, the mud soaking her hem. She pressed the barrel of her rifle to his knee, enough to make his eyes roll white. "He will," she said, voice calm as the wind. "But he'll learn. Same as you, we don't run, we don't bow. We bury what needs burying and stand on it come spring." She pushed to her feet, shoulder brushing Gideon's as they watched Dunn scramble back onto his horse, one arm dangling, useless at his side. He didn't look back. When the yard fell quiet again, Anna felt her knees threaten to buckle. Gideon caught her by the elbow, steadying her with that silent promise in his touch. Behind them, Finn peeked from the cabin doorway. Eyes wide, fists balled tight around the wood frame, Anna forced her legs to carry her to him. Forced her mouth to soften around the truth that she'd chosen, again and again, to live this life instead of letting the past live her. She brushed the hair from his forehead. "You see?" She murmured. "We stand." His lip trembled. "Will he come back?" She looked over her shoulder past Gideon, past the churned mud and the dark line of the ridge. "Maybe," she said. Then she felt Gideon's hand find hers, warm and sure. "But so will we." Anna didn't sleep that night. The door stayed bolted tight. The rifle leaned within arm's reach of the bed. She lay on her side with Finn curled between her and Gideon, the boy's small hands tucked under his chin like he was dreaming of. Warm meadows instead of the blood that soaked into the yard hours before. She counted his breaths in the dark. Counted Gideon's too steady, rumbling, alive. Every so often, she pressed her palm flat over Finn's heart, just to feel it drum. To remind herself they were all still here. When the first pale fingers of dawn clawed over the ridge, she rose. She eased from the bed so slowly that the quilt barely rustled. Gideon stirred, cracked one eye open, but didn't speak. He only watched her with that quiet knowing that had become their truest promise. "If you stand, I stand," she slipped her. Boots on by the hearth, coals still warm from the hours she'd sat there listening for hoofbeats that never came. The oilcloth sack waited by the door, the stock of her rifle peeking out like a dare. She left it for now. She didn't need its weight to feel strong. Outside, the yard was a churned mess of mud and spent shells, the fence line holding steady. Behind it like a spine that refused to break. The ground bore the scars of last night's fight hoofprints gouged deep, dark spatters where blood had soaked through to the roots. She crouched by the fence post nearest the gate, ran her palm over the fresh splits in the wood. Each splinter felt like a question. How much more can you hold? A soft shuffle behind her. She didn't need to turn to know it was Gideon. His hand settled on her shoulder, warm through the thin cloth of her shirt. "You want the bodies moved?" He asked. She shook her head. "Let 'em rot a little longer. Maybe word'll spread faster that way." He grunted a sound that meant he agreed, but didn't like the taste of it. She rose and faced him. The sunrise caught the edge of the brass band on her finger, dulled by grime but still solid. She liked it better this way scarred, like the land they guarded. "You think he'll send more?" she asked. Gideon's eyes flicked to the ridge, the trees just waking with birdsong. "If he's smart, he won't, but he ain't always been smart." Anna's mouth tugged at the corners. "Neither have we." That got a huff of a laugh out of him. He leaned in, pressed his forehead to hers, the brim of his hat tilting back just enough that she could smell the leather and sweat of him. It anchored her better than any prayer ever could. Behind them, Finn's voice cracked the hush. "Ma?" Anna turned. He stood barefoot on the stoop, hair a wild snarl, the blanket she'd wrapped around him trailing in the mud. She crossed the yard in 3 strides and scooped him up before he could shiver. "You should be sleeping." Couldn't. He buried his nose in her neck. Dreamed about horses. Bad ones. Gideon's boots squelched behind her. Ain't no horse gonna cross that line again without losing more than they come with. Finn peered over her shoulder. At the fence, his eyes wide. "Promise?" Anna lowered him onto the stoop, knelt so they were eye to eye. "Promise." They spent the day mending what the night had torn up. Gideon patched the splintered gate rail by rail, his hammer ringing out like church bells over the valley. Finn helped where he could, toting nails in a battered coffee tin, chasing off the crows that came pecking at the bloodstains. Anna took to the garden. She pulled weeds by the fistful, fingers sinking into the cold mud, each root tugged free. A reminder that not everything stubborn deserved to stay. Around midday, the sky turned the color of old bruises. Thunder cracked again, this time closer, and the wind swept down the slope with the scent of rain. She felt the prickle of it on her skin before the first drops found the back of her neck. She rose, brushing her palms on her apron. Storms coming. Gideon didn't look up from his work. Let it. The rain came down steady, a cold hiss that soaked the yard until the churned dirt turned to muck. Anna stood under the porch awning, Finn's thin arms wrapped around her waist, his cheek pressed to her ribs. She watched the water rinse the blood from the fence posts, watched the earth drink deep like it was hungry for proof they'd done what they had to do. When the worst of the downpour eased, she found Gideon by the barn, sleeves plastered to his arms, hat brim dripping. He tossed the hammer onto the dry bench inside the doorway and leaned his weight against the frame like he'd been there forever. "You want to ask?" he said before she could open her mouth. Anna stepped inside, boots squelching on the packed dirt floor. The horses stirred in their stalls but stayed calm like they trusted him more than thunder. She folded her arms. "Do you think he'll come himself?" Gideon's mouth went tight, that line between his brows deepening. "If he does, he'll bring worse than done and his pups." Anna swallowed the bitter taste of that. "Then we're ready." He looked at her then, really looked like he was counting every crack she'd managed to patch over in herself since that cold station platform, where they'd first stood shoulder to shoulder. When he pushed off the beam and crossed to her, he didn't say a word. He just framed her face in his hands, the rough scrape of his thumbs catching tears she didn't remember letting fall. "You ever wonder," she whispered, "how much more we've got left in us?" He bent until his forehead brushed hers. "No, 'cause wondering don't change a damn thing." The words settled in her chest like a stone dropped in a well sinking deep, ringing true. She let out a breath that felt like it carried every old ghost with it. "Storm'll pass," he said. "It always does." They went inside together, Finn trailing after them like a small muddy shadow. They dried him by the hearth, Gideon fussing with the blanket until Anna finally batted his hands away and did it herself. When the boy's eyes closed, lashes damp against his cheeks, they stayed there, Anna in the rocker, Gideon on the floor, one big hand curved protectively around her ankle like he could anchor her there through any gale. Outside, the rain kept its vigil. Thunder rolled, softer now, more like a warning rattling its last before dawn. And in that hush, Anna felt it, the surety she hadn't known she was waiting for. Whatever came down that ridge, whatever past rode up hungry and cruel, they would meet it together, not with blind hope, not with easy prayers, but with grit packed under their fingernails, with fence posts hammered deep, with roots tangled in blood and promise. They would stand, and they would make the land remember every name it tried to swallow whole. By the time the storm broke for good, the creek behind the barn had swollen to twice its width, its banks churning with mud and broken branches. Anna stood at its edge in the weak dawnlight, boots sinking into the soft earth, and watched the current pull away whatever the rain had torn loose. There was something comforting in that, knowing some things were meant to be carried off, never to come back. Behind her, the cabin windows glowed with lamplight. Gideon's shape moved inside, stoking the fire, checking the rifle he never let stray far from reach. She liked the shape of him there in the warm flicker, solid, sure. The wind could howl all it liked, but the man didn't bend unless he meant to. Finn's laughter cracked through the hush behind her. She turned to see him in the yard, barefoot, in the wet grass, chasing a stick he'd thrown for the dog that had taken to shadowing him everywhere. Some neighbor's stray that had wandered up during the last thaw skin and bones. Half-starved, but loyal enough once he realized the boy's hand meant food instead of blows. She watched Finn tumble into the mud, pop back up with a grin that stretched his whole face. The dog barked once, tail whipping side to side like it couldn't believe its luck. Anna's throat went tight around the sight. Proof that not all strays stayed broken. When she turned back to the creek, she thought of the men they'd buried out near the fence line. She wondered if the thaw would bring the memory of them back up through the roots. If trouble would come riding in on the same trail, faces different, but the hunger just as sharp. She dipped her fingers into the icy water, let the sting anchor her there in the moment. A promise made to the dirt and the current alike. I won't run, not again. Gideon's boots crunched on the wet grass behind her. She didn't look up as he stopped at her shoulder, just felt the warmth of him settle close enough that the morning chill lost its bite. You checking the flood line? He asked, checking more than that. He crouched, palm braced on his knee as he studied the water. It'll hold. Might run wild for a while, but it'll settle. Everything settles, you mean? He tipped his head, his eyes catching the gray light in a way that made her feel both seen and safe. If you hold it still long enough. She wiped her wet hand on her skirt, straightened up. Fence lines do another check. I already walked it. She snorted. You always walk it. Then walk it with me, he said, standing, his knuckles brushing hers. Ain't the same alone. So they did shoulder to shoulder. Along the muddied path that traced their boundary, boots sucking at the earth with every step. The fence still stood where it should, rails patched from the last trouble, nails driven deep enough that it would take more than wind or men to pull them loose. Halfway down the south line, Anna paused. She set her palm to a split rail, traced the rough scar where a bullet had sheared off a chunk of wood last month. Gideon watched her fingers work the groove. Fence held, he said, voice low. Held then, holds now. Doesn't mean it. Won't crack again. His hand closed over hers, warm and rough. Doesn't mean we won't fix it again. She leaned into him, forehead resting against his shoulder for the span of 3 breaths before she pulled away. They finished the walk without words. Sometimes words just got in the way. When they came back around the corner, Finn and the dog were waiting on the stoop, the boy's hair wild as a crow's nest, his feet caked black up to his shins. Mr. Culver's wagon's coming. Finn shouted, pointing down the trail. Sure enough, a cloud of dust rose behind the trees. A delivery or a warning, Anna thought. Or both. Culver reined in at the fence, his old mule lathered and huffing. The trader tipped his hat to Anna first. Then Gideon, morning, he called. Didn't mean to drop by uninvited. You got something worth the visit? Gideon asked. Culver's eyes flicked to Finn and the dog, then back to Anna. Might be. They let him in. The old man stomped the mud off his boots by the door, settled at their table like he'd sat there 100 times before. He opened his coat and pulled out a folded scrap of paper, yellowed at the edges. Came through on the last freight, Culver said. Some bounty runner pinned it up in town. Thought you'd want to see it before word got too wide. Anna smoothed the paper flat. A sketch stared back rough, but the curve of the jaw, the braid tucked behind one ear. It was her. Not as she was now, maybe, but close enough for the wrong eyes to see. Beneath it, a price that made her stomach twist. Enough to tempt desperate men with nothing left to lose. They upped it, she said, voice flat. Culver nodded. He wants you back bad enough to make it worth the ride for fools. Gideon didn't move, but the air around him felt heavier, like the barrel of a loaded gun waiting to fire. They come, he said. They don't ride out. Culver cleared his throat. A man like him don't care if you send him back. Dead just means he'll send more. Each one meaner than the last. Anna folded the paper, tucked it into her apron pocket. She looked at Finn, who sat cross-legged on the floor, tracing shapes on the dog's back. A little boy who shouldn't have to know this kind of fear. Not again. What would you do, Culver? She asked. The old man barked a dry laugh. If I had what you have, I'd dig in deeper than the frost line. Make this place so mean they'd forget it's here. Gideon nodded once. That's what I plan. After Culver left, Anna stood at the window and watched the dust trail fade behind. The ridge. The sketch in her pocket felt like a brand pressed to her skin. A reminder that no matter how far she'd come, there was still a piece of her some bastard thought he owned. She felt Gideon step behind her, arms bracketing her sides. His voice found the soft spot just below her ear. He don't own you. Not now, not ever. She leaned her head back against his chest, eyes closed. You can't watch the fence every minute. Then we make sure it don't matter who gets through it. They spent the next week turning that promise to iron. Gideon rode out to talk to the neighbors they trusted, the ones who'd lost stock to the same men who thought the valley was theirs for the taking. Men and women who knew what it meant to stand together when the ridge turned mean. Anna worked the garden rows until her palms bled raw. She showed Finn how to tie the strings that would keep the beans from sagging when the storms came. At night, she sat by the hearth and counted the shells left in the old oilcloth bag, each one a question she prayed they wouldn't have to answer. On the 7th day, the dog barked sharp just before dawn. Anna jolted awake before she knew why. She found Gideon already at the window, rifle across his knee, eyes fixed on the trail winding down from the trees. Riders? She asked. One. Just one, he said, voice flat as iron. She crossed the room, her bare feet silent on the cold. Planks. Together, they watched the shape grow clearer. Broad shoulders, hat pulled low, horse lathered from a hard run. Whoever it was, they weren't sneaking in quiet. When the rider drew close enough, Gideon muttered a curse under his breath. Well, I'll be. Anna squinted. You know him? Hell yes. And I wish I didn't. The man who swung off the horse at the gate looked rougher than the last time Gideon had seen him. Hair longer, coat patched with so many colors it looked like a beggar's quilt. But his grin was the same, sharp and too wide for the trouble it carried. He tipped his hat to Anna before Gideon even made it to the fence line. Morning. Prairie Shadow, he called, voice warm as rotgut. Heard you might need an extra gun. Anna blinked, turned to Gideon. Shadow? Gideon scowled. Old name. Old friend. Friend? The stranger laughed. I reckon he means that the same way a wolf means it when he lets you eat first. Gideon didn't flinch. What the hell are you doing here, Lyle? Lyle spread his arms, leather creaking. Man's got to make a living. Figured theirs. No better work than standing next to the only son of a bitch in this territory. Stubborn enough to tell the devil no. Anna's heart hammered in her throat. She looked at Lyle, at the scars that stitched one side of his jaw, the pistol that rode low on his hip, the eyes that didn't know how to soften. You trust him? She asked Gideon. Gideon's mouth twitched. Trust him to shoot straight. Trust him to leave when it suits him. Lyle grinned, unbothered. Ain't that the truth? Anna glanced at the house, at Finn's small shape watching from the porch, the dog pressed tight to his side. She turned back to the two men, the old ghosts standing between them like shadows in the wet grass. You ride with us, she said to Lyle. You ride honest. Lyle tipped his hat again, that grin never fading. Ma'am, you got my word. And if my word ain't worth spit, you got my back to put the bullets in it. Gideon's scowl deepened. You pull one trick, save it, Shadow. I'm here. For the same reason you are. Lyle's eyes met Anna's, something like respect flickering there. Some things you stand for, even when you know they might bury you for it. The wind picked up, rattling the fence rails where old blood still stained the wood. Anna slipped her hand into Gideon's, felt the ring press between their palms like a brand. Then let's stand, she said. And the creek behind the barn roared on, carrying away what it could, leaving the rest for them to face together. By the next morning, word of Lyle's arrival had spread down the ridge like wildfire in dry grass. Anna stood by the window with a damp cloth in her hand, wiping away the streaks Finn had left behind with his grubby fingers. She could hear the two men outside, Lyle's voice a low rumble, Gideon's sharper in reply. Two different storms, she thought, somehow tied to the same patch of ground. She watched Finn run laps around the yard, the stray dog always 2 steps behind. Every so often he'd stop, squint up the trail, then tear off again. Anna knew he was waiting to see if more riders would appear, good ones, bad ones, or the kind that thought they could take what didn't belong to them. She wrung the cloth out and draped it over the basin. When she stepped out onto the porch, the morning air bit at her skin, fresh with the scent of pine and the distant whisper of the creek still swollen from the storm. Lyle leaned against the fence rail, arms folded, hat pushed back. He looked like he'd been carved out of the same rough timber as the barn behind him, scarred, weathered, stubborn enough to stand through any squall. Gideon was pacing in front of him, boots leaving deep prints in the damp earth. Don't need your damn tricks, Gideon was saying. This is our fight. We handle it our way. Lyle snorted. Your way got 3 bodies in the dirt already. You really think that's the last of it? Anna came down the steps, boots soft in the mud. What's he suggesting? She asked, looking at Gideon first. Gideon shot Lyle a look sharp enough to draw blood. He wants to ride out, make trouble before it finds us. Lyle tilted his head, eyes sliding to Anna. Ma'am, with all respect, trouble's already found you. Fence or no fence, they'll keep coming until they think you're too much to swallow. So maybe you show 'em you bite back. Anna folded, her arms tight across her chest. And how many more bodies does that leave buried under my fence line? Lyle's grin was a razor-thin thing. Fewer than waiting around for 'em to pick you off in the yard. Finn's laughter rang out behind them, the boy leaping over puddles like they were snakes waiting to strike. He didn't know how close they were to finding him in the crosshairs, too. Or maybe he did, and that was why he laughed so loud, too. Scare the fear back into the woods. She felt Gideon's hand brush hers, rough fingertips catching the edge of her sleeve. She didn't pull away. They both knew there'd been a line in the dirt from the start, between staying and fighting, or running until there was nowhere left to run. She met Lyle's eyes. You ride out, you ride smart. No names, no blood. That doesn't need spilling. We ain't monsters. Lyle dipped his hat. Never said you were. I'll sniff 'em out. Pass word back. If they're closer than we think, then we do it on our ground, Gideon finished, voice low. No hero tricks, Lyle. Not here. Lyle pushed off the fence, boots squelching in the mud as he stepped closer. He was taller than Gideon, rangier, with that coyote grin that made Anna's gut twist with equal parts caution and relief. I didn't come here to die, Shadow, Lyle said. Just came to make sure if we're gonna bleed, we do it on our feet. He tipped his hat to Anna again, then ambled toward the shed where his horse was stabled. The door swung shut behind him with a creak that felt like the final note of an old song they'd forgotten the words to. Gideon stared after him for a long while before turning to Anna. The set of his jaw made her heart ache in that familiar way, like she wanted to cradle him and shake him in the same breath. Tell me this ends. Anna, he murmured. She stepped close, palms pressed to his chest, feeling the thrum of his pulse under her thumbs. It ends when we say it does. The next days came like wolves, quiet at first, then baring teeth when you got too close. Lyle slipped in and out of the yard like smoke, always returning with news that made Gideon's eyes darker than the dusk. Men moving up the ridge. A wagon spotted near the old mining road. 3 mules loaded with crates. No one in their right mind hauled this far without good reason. Anna sat up nights by the hearth, Shelling peas into a bowl while Finn snored by the fire, the dog curled tight against his side. Each pop of the shells in her hand felt like a tiny promise. Still here. Still standing. One afternoon, Lyle brought back a scrap of cloth-red flannel, torn and stiff with old sweat. He tossed it onto the table between them. "Their mark," he said. "Same they used when they rode up on Dead Creek back in '67. Means they want folks to know whose shadow's coming." Gideon's lip curled. "Bastards think fear's enough." Lyle shrugged. "Most times it is." Anna traced the edge of the fabric with her thumb. She remembered Dead Creek, though she'd never been there herself. The stories drifted from one side of the valley to the other like smoke that wouldn't clear. Farms burned, folks driven out with just the clothes on their backs. Some didn't even get that far. Finn wandered in from the yard, cheeks flushed from chasing the dog through the garden rows. He stopped when he saw the three of them hunched over the mark, his eyes wide. "What's that?" he asked. Anna palmed the cloth, slipping it into her apron pocket before he could see the truth in it. "Just a rag, nothing worth worrying over." Lyle's grin flickered. Smart kid, that one. Knows when grown folks lie. Gideon's eyes didn't leave hers as he said, "So do smart women." That night, Anna lay awake, staring at the rafters. She counted the knots in the wood, the nail heads that held the roof tight when the storms came. She felt the weight of the brass ring pressing into her ribs where her hand lay flat against her chest. Gideon shifted beside her, arm curling around her waist like it always did when he felt her mind running. "We'll send 'em packing," he murmured. Anna closed her eyes. "And if we don't?" His breath stirred her hair. "Then they bury us on our land. And they'll spend the rest of their days digging us out root by root." She wanted to believe it was enough. She wanted to believe the land cared about the bones tucked into its belly dot at dawn. She rose before the rooster's crow, pulling her boots on with hands that didn't shake the way they once had. She stepped outside and found Lyle at the fence, back from wherever the night had taken him. His coat dripped with mist, and he held something crumpled in one hand. "Where?" she asked. He passed it to her, a slip of parchment. The ink smeared from rain but clear enough to read the names, hers, Finn's, and a price beside each, scrawled like an afterthought. "They're in Mill Hollow," Lyle said. "Camped near the old quarry, 10 men, maybe more." Gideon appeared at her shoulder, one hand brushing the small of her back. "They bring the quarry down on our heads, or we bring it down on theirs." Anna folded the slip, tucked it into her pocket with the red cloth. She felt the ridge loom behind her roots, tangled deep, frost lines thick with secrets. The creek hissed in the distance, carrying last night's rain toward rivers that would never remember her name. She looked at the two men, her husband, her unlikely sentry, and she felt the ring on her finger like a brand that said, "We don't run, then we ride," she said, her voice steady. "We ride first." And somewhere deep in the thawed ground beneath her boots, the land seemed to breathe with her, ready to remember every footstep, every promise, every name they refused to let the wind carry away. They saddled up before the sun broke full over the ridge. The light came thin through the pines, catching in the curls of Gideon's breath as he tightened the cinch on Anna's mare. Lyle crouched by the fence, rolling a stub of tobacco between his teeth, eyes darting to the tree line every few seconds like he half expected the shadows to lunge. Finn sat on the porch steps, the stray dog pressed tight against his knee. He watched his mother mount with a silence that clung heavier than any goodbye. Anna rode to him last, boots brushing the churned mud that still bore the memory of Dunn and his men. She dismounted, stooping low to catch his chin in her palm. His eyes glistened, but he didn't flinch from the cold bite in the air or the worry that shaped her mouth. "You remember what I told you?" she asked. Finn nodded. "Fence line's yours, no matter who knocks." She pressed her forehead to his, the brass ring warm between them. "Good boy." Gideon held the reins for her when she climbed back up. The horses shifted under their weight, tails flicking at the morning chill. Lael spat a shred of tobacco into the dirt and mounted last, rifle resting easy across his thighs. "You sure you want the boy here?" he asked, jerking his chin at Finn. Gideon's answer was a single sharp look. Lyle shrugged, grinning like a wolf that had learned not to bite the hand that fed him. They rode out as the creek behind the barn whispered under the thaw. The trail twisted through the valley. Old cart ruts still visible from the last supply run before the snow came. Anna kept her eyes ahead, but she felt every ripple in the land, each ridge and hollow that had hidden her once, each grove of pines that had tried to swallow her name. When they stopped at the old quarry's edge, dawn had climbed enough to throw the camp below into stark relief. Smoke drifted from a half-buried pit where men hunched over their fire, rifles stacked nearby like they believed the world owed them the ground they squatted on. Lyle slid from his saddle, boots scuffing the loose stone. He crouched beside Anna's horse, tugging his coat tighter. "Looks like 12, he muttered. "More than I counted." Gideon's jaw ticked. "Makes no difference, we didn't come to count." Anna swung her leg over, boots crunching grit. She crouched beside the scrub brush that lined the drop, eyes tracing the path that sloped down toward the fire. "They're not expecting trouble," she said. "Not yet." Lael barked a quiet laugh. "Most men don't, till it's got teeth round their throat." Gideon laid his hand on Anna's shoulder, squeezing once. "You stay behind me." She shook her head, eyes never leaving the men below. "No, we ride in together, or we don't ride in at all." The wind shifted, carrying up the echo of rough laughter, the clink of bottles. Somewhere a horse snorted, hooves scuffing stone. Lyle rose, racking around into his Winchester with a soft, deadly clack. "Then let's knock," he said. They came down the quarry slope slow, horses picking careful steps through scree that rattled like bones. The first man to spot them nearly choked on his flask, eyes wide as the fire behind him. He scrambled for his rifle, but Lyle's bullet found the dirt inches from his boots. "Easy," Lyle barked. "Ain't no sense in dying on your back." The camp snapped awake, guns half raised, boots shuffling in the ash. Anna's heart slammed against her ribs so hard she thought it might crack them. But she kept her reins steady, her gaze pinned to the man who stepped forward, broad shoulders, beard grizzled to his collar, eyes flat and mean as a snake. He spat, glaring up at Gideon. "You the one calls himself Hale?" Gideon leaned forward, elbows braced on the horn. "I'm the one that says you pack up and ride out, or I plant you so deep the creek won't carry what's left." The man's lip curled. "You got brass, I'll give you that." Anna spoke before Gideon could. "I'm the one you came for. You got something to say it to me." The man's eyes cut to her, lingering too long at the edge of her braid, the brass ring glinting when she shifted. "That price is still good, girl. Ain't no shame in giving up when the wind's against you." Anna swung down from her horse. So fast the Mare flinched. She stalked forward, boots scuffing dust. Gideon's breath caught behind her, but he didn't move. He knew better. She stopped just shy of the camp's ragged circle, the heat of their fire brushing her cheeks. She spoke low, but the words carried like a crack of ice over the quarry walls. "You rode out here for a payday. You thought a scrap of paper would drag me back, but you never knew the fence I'd build when the fear was gone." The man's brow twitched, confusion scraping at his smug grin. Anna lifted her chin. "You want me? Try to take me." Gideon's rifle thundered. Before the man's mouth could split into an answer, the bullet buried itself in the ground between his boots. The camp flinched back, eyes wild in the firelight. "Go on," Gideon growled. "Finish the offer." No one moved. Lyle's laugh broke the hush-low cold. He stepped up beside Anna, rifle across his shoulder. "She's giving you your chance. You walk away, you keep breathing. You stand, you sink with this pit. A younger man on the far side shifted, boots scraping rock. His eyes darted to Anna, then to Gideon, then back to the man who'd led them here. A kid, really. No older than. She'd been when she first stumbled off that train, nothing but a tattered shawl to guard her ribs. "Boss?" the boy asked. His voice cracked around the word. The older man's lip curled, a snarl caught halfway. "Cowards, all of you." He lunged for his pistol. Anna didn't feel the shot leave her rifle, just the jolt in her shoulder, the crack, echoing off the stone. The man jerked back, clutching his wrist where the bullet had torn through. His gun clattered at his feet. "Don't," she said, voice calm as dawn. "Don't die for a man who'll forget your name before the dirt's cold." The kid dropped his rifle first, then another man. The camp unraveled like rotten thread, boots shifting backward, rifles clunking to the dust. The fire popped in. Hissed, smoke curling up to meet the pale sun. Lyle stepped forward, eyes fixed on the wounded leader. "Word rides faster than you do. You spread it. She's not for the taking. This land's not for the taking. Next man tries, he don't get a warning shot." The man spat blood. Hate coiled tight in his eyes, but he said nothing. He backed up, dragging his arm close, boots slipping on stone. Gideon holstered his rifle. Came to stand beside Anna. He didn't touch her, didn't need to. His presence was the touch. The ring on her hand caught the light as she lowered her gun. They rode home slow, the quarry walls swallowing the noise behind them. By the time the cabin roof came into view, the sun had climbed high enough to burn. The chill from the air. Finn waited at the fence, dog bouncing at his side. When Anna swung down, he ran for her, arms flung wide. She caught him mid-step, burying her nose in his hair, breathing deep the wild, muddy scent of a boy who hadn't learned yet how to stay small. Gideon lifted his hat, eyes crinkled at the corners. Lyle leaned against the gate, a grin playing. Under his scarred jaw, "Think they'll come again?" Finn asked, voice muffled against her neck. Anna set him down, brushed the hair from his brow. "Maybe, but they'll find the fence lines meaner than they remember." She felt Gideon's arm slip around her waist. She felt the land under her boots, soft with thaw but firm enough to hold every root she'd driven deep. Her voice dropped to a whisper only Finn could hear. "We stand. That's all we ever do." And a creak behind the barn kept on whispering, carrying off the old fear, washing the blood from the fence posts, singing a song only the roots could understand. 2. More great stories are next. Don't miss them. Subscribe and turn on notifications.